Hey everyone, I'm curious. Where are you all tuning in from? It would be great to hear a bit about the different places our community is connecting from around the world. Share where you're watching from and maybe a fun fact about your local area. I'm always excited to learn more about the amazing people who support us. Can't wait to hear your stories. Best regards. The woods have a way of revealing truths we're not prepared to face. That's something I learned in the autumn of 2003, though I wish I'd remained ignorant. Some knowledge changes you forever, corrupts the lens through which you view the world. I'm committing this account to paper because I must preserve what happened, even as each word revives memories I've spent years trying to bury. My daughter Emily was only 10 that year. We lived in a modest apartment in Richmond, Virginia, just the two of us since her mother walked out when Emily was 4. The abandonment left scars on both of us, though Emily's were deeper, manifesting in small ways. Her reluctance to form attachments, her fear of being left alone, her need for routines and traditions that provided stability. That's how our annual cabin trips began. Every autumn, we'd escape to a small, rustic cabin in the Shenandoah Valley for a long weekend. Those few days in the wilderness became sacred to us, a chance to strengthen our bond away from the distractions of city life. For Emily, with her curly blonde hair and eyes that sparked with curiosity, these trips represented adventure. For me, they offered rare moments of peace in an otherwise chaotic existence balancing work and single parenthood. I remember preparing for what would be our final trip with particular clarity. Emily sat cross-legged on our living room floor, methodically packing her backpack with field guides, a magnifying glass, and her prized possession, a leather-bound sketchbook for documenting wildlife. "Dad, do you think we'll see a black bear this time?" she asked, her voice tinged with both hope and apprehension. "Probably not," I replied, zipping up my duffel bag. "They tend to keep their distance from humans, but we'll definitely see deer, maybe some foxes." "What about wolves?" She looked up, her blue eyes wide. I chuckled. "No wolves in Virginia anymore, Em. Not for a long time." How confidently I dismissed her question, how naively secure in my understanding of the natural world. If only I'd known what truly lurked in those ancient woods. We left early Friday morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon as we loaded our Honda Civic. Emily clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a worn wolf named Luna, against her chest as she settled into the passenger seat. The 3-hour drive passed pleasantly, filled with our favorite music and Emily's animated chatter about school. The deeper we drove into the Shenandoah Valley, the more the landscape transformed. Urban sprawl gave way to rolling farmland, which eventually surrendered to dense, vibrant forest. Autumn had painted the trees in brilliant crimsons and golds, a spectacular display that never failed to take my breath away. "It's like the trees are on fire," Emily whispered, pressing her palm against the window as we wound through the mountain roads. We reached the cabin just after noon. It stood in a small clearing, surrounded by towering oak and maple trees that dappled the ground with shadows. Nothing fancy, just a one-story structure built of weathered logs with a sagging porch and a stone chimney. But it felt like home the moment we stepped inside. The interior was exactly as we remembered. A main room with a fireplace and kitchenette, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom with temperamental plumbing. The wooden floors creaked beneath our feet as we moved about, unpacking groceries and settling in. Emily immediately claimed her usual bed by the window, carefully arranging Luna and her books on the nightstand. "Can we hike to the lookout today?" she asked, bouncing on her heels as I stowed our food in the ancient refrigerator. "Not today, kiddo. It's already afternoon, and I want to check the trail conditions first." I glanced out the window at the gathering clouds. "Besides, looks like we might get some rain. How about we gather firewood, play some cards, and save the big hike for tomorrow?" She agreed, hiding her disappointment admirably. We spent the afternoon combing the edges of the clearing for fallen branches, building up a respectable woodpile beside the porch. As the daylight began to fade, we retreated inside. I prepared a simple dinner of pasta and sauce on the old gas stove, while Emily set the table with our mismatched camping dishes. That evening remains etched in my memory as our final moment of normalcy, sitting before a crackling fire, playing endless rounds of Crazy Eights, roasting marshmallows for s'mores. Emily's laughter echoed through the cabin as melted chocolate smeared across her chin. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees and occasionally tapping branches against the roof. "That sounds like fingers," Emily said suddenly, turning toward the window. "Like someone's trying to get in." "Just the trees, Em," I assured her, though a peculiar chill crept up my spine. "They get friendly when it's windy." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on the darkened glass. "I had a weird dream last night about this place." "What kind of weird?" She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "There was something in the woods, watching us through the windows. It had yellow eyes." "Probably just thinking about wildlife," I said lightly, though something in her expression unsettled me. "Your brain mixing up bears and owls into something scary." "Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. Later, as I tucked her into bed, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Dad? If I hear something in the night, can I come to your room?" "Of course," I smiled, brushing hair from her forehead. "But the only thing you'll hear is me snoring." I kissed her goodnight and retreated to my own room, leaving both our doors ajar. Outside, the wind continued to howl and rain began to patter against the roof. I lay awake longer than usual, listening to the storm intensify, trying to ignore a growing sensation of unease. Had the forest always felt this watchful, this aware? I dismissed the thought as imagination inflamed by my daughter's talk of dreams and yellow eyes. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my restlessness and I drifted into uneasy sleep. I awoke once in the deepest part of night, certain I'd heard something moving on the porch, a slow, deliberate scraping like claws on wood. Heart pounding, I strained to listen, but there was only the sound of rain and wind. I told myself it was a branch dragged by the storm, or perhaps a raccoon seeking shelter. I had no way of knowing that this night marked the beginning of our nightmare, that the sounds I dismissed were the first herald of a horror beyond comprehension. By the time dawn broke through leaden clouds, we were still blissfully ignorant of what awaited us in the ancient forests of the Shenandoah. Sometimes ignorance truly is the only mercy we're granted. Morning arrived with lingering mist hugging the treetops and air scrubbed clean by the night storm. After a breakfast of pancakes and hot chocolate, Emily stood at the window, pointing excitedly at a pair of deer grazing at the forest's edge. "Can we go to the lookout now?" she asked, already pulling on her hiking boots. The rain stopped. I checked my watch, just past 9. "Sure, plenty of daylight ahead. Let's pack some lunch." The trail began about a quarter-mile from our cabin, a narrow path that wound through increasingly dense forest before climbing to a rocky outcropping that offered spectacular views of the valley. We'd hiked it many times before, and I knew the round trip would take about 4 hours at Emily's pace, with plenty of stops for her to examine interesting fungi or sketch wildflowers. As we set out, I noticed something unusual. The forest seemed quieter than normal. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of our boots on damp earth and the occasional drip of water from saturated leaves. I dismissed my unease, attributing the silence to the aftermath of the storm. The first mile passed pleasantly enough. Emily pointed out mushrooms sprouting from fallen logs and collected colorful leaves for her scrapbook. The sun occasionally broke through the clouds, casting dappled light across the forest floor. But as we ventured deeper, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The trees grew older, their trunks wider and more gnarled. Moss hung in thick curtains, and the underbrush thinned, as though the ancient sentinels guarding this part of the forest allowed nothing to intrude upon their domain. The air felt heavier, tinged with a musty scent like rotting vegetation. "Dad, look!" Emily suddenly stopped, pointing to the ground ahead. "What made those?" I crouched beside her, examining what appeared to be tracks pressed into the soft earth, large, five-toed impressions that resembled a bear's, but with disconcertingly elongated digits. They formed a clear trail leading away from our path, deeper into the woods. "Probably a black bear," I said, though doubt colored my voice. The tracks seemed wrong, too large, the claws too prominent. "Let's stick to our trail, okay?" Emily nodded, but her gaze lingered on the mysterious prints. We continued upward, reaching the lookout just before noon. Despite my growing disquiet, I had to admit the view was spectacular. Rolling mountains blanketed in autumn foliage stretching to the horizon, the valley floor a patchwork of fields and forests. We ate our sandwiches perched on sun-warmed rocks, the peculiar tracks temporarily forgotten as Emily chattered about school and her friends. Yet I couldn't shake the sense of being observed, a prickling awareness that raised the hair on my neck whenever I glanced toward the tree line. On our descent, we encountered the tracks again, or rather they intersected our path, as though whatever made them had deliberately crossed where we would walk. "Can we follow them, just for a little bit?" Emily pleaded, her natural curiosity overcoming any trepidation. I hesitated, checking my watch. We had plenty of daylight left and the sky remained clear. "Just for 15 minutes, I conceded. "Then we head straight back to the cabin. Deal?" "Deal," she beamed, immediately setting off along the strange trail. The tracks led us away from the marked path, weaving between massive trees whose canopies blocked much of the sunlight. I found myself checking my watch frequently as we penetrated deeper into unfamiliar territory, increasingly certain we should turn back. "5 more minutes, Em," I called as she darted ahead. "Dad, I found something." Her voice echoed with excitement and a tinge of apprehension. I hurried forward and emerged into a small clearing I hadn't known existed. At its center stood a dilapidated wooden structure, not quite a cabin but larger than a shed. Its weathered boards had turned silver with age, the roof partially collapsed. Vines climbed its walls, reclaiming it for the forest. "What is this place?" Emily whispered, approaching cautiously. "Probably an old hunter's blind or Forest Service outpost," I replied, though something about the structure filled me with inexplicable dread. "We should head back. Can't we just look inside, please?" Her eyes pleaded, that insatiable curiosity burning bright. Against my better judgment, I relented. "Quickly, don't touch anything." The door hung precariously from rusted hinges, opening with a groan that seemed to reverberate through the clearing. A wave of foul air washed over us, the stench of decay and something else, something acrid and unnatural that burned my nostrils. The interior was a single room, illuminated by shafts of light filtering through holes in the roof. Rotting furniture lay scattered about, a toppled table, broken chairs, a rusted metal bed frame stripped of any mattress. In one corner, a pile of what appeared to be animal bones gleamed dully. Some were clearly from deer or raccoons, but others I couldn't identify, their proportions disturbingly human-like. "Dad," Emily's voice quavered as she pointed to a dark corner, "there's something there." I followed her gaze to a small wooden chest partially hidden beneath debris. Before I could stop her, Emily darted forward and lifted its lid. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its cover stained and cracked with age. "We shouldn't touch that," I warned, but Emily had already extracted it, her fingers tracing the strange symbols embossed on its cover. "Look at this," she breathed, opening it to reveal pages filled with cramped, frantic handwriting, interspersed with disturbing drawings, twisted figures lurking among stylized trees, anatomical sketches of creatures that couldn't possibly exist. I peered over her shoulder, my unease growing as I made out fragments of text. "It watches from the trees, never sleeping, never alone. The tracks appear after rain. Do not follow them. Yellow eyes in the darkness. It knows when you see it. The shed offers no protection. Nothing does. A sudden crash outside made us both jump, probably just a branch falling, but it shattered the spell cast by the journal. We're leaving, now." I took Emily's hand, pulling her toward the door. "Can I take the journal?" she asked, clutching it against her chest. "We can figure out what it means." Every instinct screamed against removing anything from this place, but Emily's pleading expression wore down my resolve. "Fine, but we're going straight back to the cabin." The return journey seemed to take twice as long, shadows stretching as afternoon waned toward evening. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that something tracked our movements from just beyond the trees. Emily clutched the journal tightly, her earlier excitement replaced by a watchful silence. By the time we reached the cabin, twilight had descended, transforming the forest into a maze of deepening shadows. I locked the door behind us, something I'd never felt compelled to do before, and busied myself preparing dinner while Emily spread the journal on the kitchen table, completely absorbed. "Listen to this," she called as I stirred a pot of stew. "It is drawn to light and sound. Darkness is not safety but concealment. Move only when necessary." Maybe we should put that away for tonight," I suggested, discomfort crawling up my spine. She ignored me, flipping pages with growing agitation. "Dad, I think whoever wrote this was hiding from something in the forest." She looked up, her face pale. "Something that's still out there." I forced a reassuring smile. "It's just an old journal, probably some hermit's ramblings or maybe even fiction. Nothing to worry about." As darkness fell completely, I drew the curtains and stoked the fire, trying to create a bubble of normalcy. We ate dinner in strained silence, the journal lying between us like an unwelcome guest. Emily picked at her food, her gaze repeatedly drawn to the windows. "What if it's real?" she finally whispered. "What if we're being watched right now?" "There's nothing out there except trees and normal forest creatures," I assured her, even as doubt gnawed at my certainty. We were washing dishes when the first sound came, a low grating noise like metal drawn slowly across stone. It emanated from the direction of the porch, followed by what could only be described as the deliberate tap of claws on wood. Emily's eyes widened in terror. I pressed a finger to my lips, set down the dish I'd been drying, and moved silently to the window. Pulling the curtain back just enough to peer out, I scanned the darkness. The porch appeared empty, but at the edge of the clearing where forest began, I glimpsed movement, a tall, unnaturally thin silhouette that seemed to shift between the trees. As I watched, paralyzed, it tilted what must have been its head, and two glowing yellow points pierced the darkness, eyes fixed unmistakably on the cabin, on us. I let the curtain fall and turned to find Emily clutching the journal, her hands trembling. "It's here," she whispered. "The Watcher is here." That night remains a blur of terror and vigilance. We huddled in Emily's room, doors locked, a chair wedged beneath the knob. The sounds continued intermittently, scratching at the walls, that terrible grating noise, and occasionally a low guttural vocalization that resembled no animal I'd ever heard. Emily clutched Luna to her chest, knuckles white, as I paged through the journal by flashlight, searching for any information that might help us survive until dawn. Most entries were indecipherable, the handwriting deteriorating into frenzied scribbles or symbols that made my eyes hurt to look at. But certain phrases stood out with horrifying clarity. "It cannot enter unless invited. Keep doors locked, windows shuttered. It feeds on fear first, flesh second. Control your terror or it will sense weakness. Dawn drives it back into the deep woods. Nighttime is its domain." Around 3 a.m, a new sound joined the cacophony, the slow, deliberate turning of the front doorknob. Emily whimpered, burying her face against my shoulder as I raised the hunting knife I'd retrieved from my backpack, but the door held, and eventually the attempt ceased. As predicted in the journal, the presence retreated with the first gray light of dawn. We emerged cautiously from the bedroom to find the cabin undisturbed, save for long parallel scratches marring the front door, 5 distinct lines gouged deep into the wood. "We need to leave," I said, already gathering our belongings. "Now, before it gets dark again." Emily nodded, clutching the journal. "What about this?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave it behind, to pretend we'd never found it, or the shed, or those tracks. But a deeper instinct warned that knowledge, however terrifying, was our only protection. "Bring it," I decided. "We might need it." We packed in frantic silence, constantly glancing toward the windows as though expecting to see that elongated silhouette emerging from the trees. The forest seemed to watch our preparations with malevolent patience, as though aware we couldn't escape so easily. The drive home passed in tense silence, Emily hunched in the passenger seat, the journal open on her lap. Occasionally she would read passages aloud, her voice barely audible over the car's engine. "Distance offers no safety. Once it has your scent, your image, it can find you anywhere. It is patient beyond human comprehension. Weeks, months, years mean nothing to it." By the time we reached Richmond, afternoon was fading toward evening. Our apartment, typically unremarkable in its urban ordinariness, suddenly seemed like a sanctuary. I secured every lock, drew all curtains, and tried to reassure Emily with pizza and a movie she loved. But her smile never reached her eyes, and when she finally fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion overcame fear. I carried her to bed, knowing our ordeal was far from over. That week passed in a semblance of normalcy. Emily attended school. I returned to my job at the engineering firm. We spoke little of what had happened, as though acknowledging it might somehow strengthen whatever connection had been established. But signs accumulated that something had followed us home. Small scratches appeared on our apartment door. Emily reported yellow eyes watching from the parking lot when she glanced out her bedroom window. Twice I woke at precisely 3:17 a.m. to the sound of that distinctive metallic scraping outside, only to find nothing when I investigated. Emily's nightmares worsened. She would wake screaming about the Watcher, describing how it stood over her bed, spindly fingers reaching for her face. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes as sleep deprivation took its toll. Her teachers called, concerned about her inability to focus and her new habit of constantly checking the windows during class. After 2 weeks of escalating phenomena, I found Emily in the living room at midnight, hunched over the journal with papers spread around her. She'd been methodically transcribing and analyzing its contents, creating timelines and patterns I hadn't noticed. "Dad," she looked up, her young face grave with understanding beyond her years. "I know what it is." She pointed to a particularly disturbing illustration. A tall, emaciated figure with elongated limbs, its head a featureless oval save for those piercing eyes. Annotations surrounded the drawing, including a word repeated in various languages: voyeur, watcher, observateur, beobachter. "It's old," Emily explained, her voice steadier than it had been in days. "The journal belonged to different people over time. See the handwriting changes? They all encountered it in those woods. Some escaped, but it followed them. Others—" She swallowed hard. "Others didn't leave the cabin alive." "How does this help us?" I asked, fighting rising despair. There might be a way to stop it. She flipped to the journal's final pages, where a different hand had written in a more controlled script. This person did research. They found stories about the Watcher going back to the 1700s, when settlers first came to the valley. Before that, Native American legends warned about a creature that stalked from the trees. The next day I called in sick and drove to the university library while Emily was at school. The reference librarian raised an eyebrow at my requests: local folklore, unexplained disappearances in the Shenandoah Valley, Native American legends of malevolent forest entities, but directed me to relevant materials. Hour after hour I pored over dusty tomes and microfiche newspapers, piecing together a horrifying pattern. Every few decades, reports would emerge of hikers or campers vanishing in specific areas of the national park. Some were found weeks later, their bodies mutilated in ways that defied conventional predator attacks. Most were never recovered. I was so absorbed that I jumped when someone spoke behind me. "Finding what you need?" I turned to find an elderly man watching me intently, his rheumy eyes magnified behind thick glasses. His library badge identified him as Vernon Blackwood, Emeritus Professor of Anthropology. "Just researching local legends," I replied cautiously. He studied the material spread before me, his expression darkening. "Not just any legends. You're looking for the Watcher." My blood ran cold. "You know about it?" Vernon glanced around, then lowered his voice. "My office, 10 minutes." His cluttered office contained artifacts from around the world, tribal masks, ceremonial objects, and shelves overflowing with obscure texts. He closed the door firmly behind us. "I've studied the Watcher for 40 years, he said without preamble. "Ever since it took my brother in 1963. The authorities called it a hiking accident, but I knew better. I saw it watching from the trees at his funeral." "What is it?" I asked, desperation evident in my voice. "Not what, who." Vernon retrieved a leather portfolio from a locked drawer. His name was Elias Thornfield, a British naturalist who came to study the valley's ecosystem in 1832. His methods were unorthodox. Local tribes warned him about sacred sites he shouldn't disturb, but he ignored them. He spread photographs of yellowed journal pages across his desk, entries in the same distinctive hand as sections of our journal. Thornfield discovered something in a cave system deep in the valley, something the natives had sealed away centuries earlier. His last journal entry describes releasing a presence ancient beyond reckoning before he vanished. 3 months later, settlers reported seeing a tall figure with Thornfield's distinctive limp watching their cabins from the forest edge. "That's impossible," I whispered. "That was almost 200 years ago." Whatever entered Thornfield changed him, preserved him, Vernon continued grimly. The natives called it the hunger that walks, a parasitic entity that takes a human host but warps it over time. It feeds on fear and suffering before consuming its victims physically. How do we stop it? I asked, thinking of Emily waiting at home, vulnerable. Vernon's expression turned grave. Legend says it can be destroyed by returning it to the cave where it was originally imprisoned, using fire and iron to seal it away again. He hesitated. But no one knows the cave's location anymore. Thornfield's final journal might have contained that information, but it was lost decades ago. My breath caught. Unless it's the journal we found. Hope flickered in Vernon's faded eyes. You have Thornfield's journal? I nodded, describing our discovery in the shed. That changes everything, he breathed. With the complete journal, we might find the cave's location. He gripped my arm with surprising strength. But be careful. If you have the journal, the Watcher knows. It will do anything to prevent you from finding that cave. When I returned home that evening, Emily was waiting by the door, her face ashen. It was outside my school today, she whispered, standing across the street watching. Miss Peterson saw it too. She called security, but it disappeared. That night, as Emily finally slept, exhaustion overcoming fear, I spread the journal across the kitchen table and began a systematic review, paying special attention to Thornfield's early entries. If the cave location was documented anywhere, it would be here. Around 2 a.m. I found it, a crude map drawn on what appeared to be the journal's original end paper, partially obscured by later additions. It showed landmarks I recognized, a distinctive lightning-struck oak we'd passed on our hikes, the unusual rock formation known locally as Chimney Top, and what appeared to be the entrance to a cave system marked with a warning, primum non nocere, first, do no harm. I knew then what we had to do, return to the valley, find the cave, and end this nightmare once and for all. The scratching at our apartment door that night seemed almost triumphant, as though the Watcher sensed our plans and relished the challenge. As dawn broke, I made a decision that would either save us or doom us completely. We would return to the cabin that weekend, armed with the journal and Vernon's knowledge, to confront the entity that had haunted the valley for nearly 2 centuries, the Watcher that had once been Elias Thornfield. Preparing for our return to the Shenandoah felt like readying for war, a war against an enemy I still struggled to comprehend. Vernon agreed to accompany us, his lifetime of research potentially our only advantage. We'll need specific supplies, he instructed as we met in a coffee shop far from my apartment, where I felt marginally safer discussing our plans. Iron nails, hand-forged if possible, salt, kerosene, torches, and something of significance to Thornfield. The journal itself, I suggested. Vernon nodded grimly. That should suffice. The entity within him covets it, has been seeking it for generations. We can use that desire as bait. Over the next 3 days, I gathered what we needed while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Emily helped, her initial terror gradually hardening into determined resolve. Despite my instincts screaming to keep her as far from danger as possible, I knew I couldn't leave her alone, not with the Watcher aware of her, hunting her. I'm scared, she admitted the night before our departure, as we packed our supplies into backpacks. But I'm more scared of living like this forever, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering when it'll come through my window. I hugged her fiercely, marveling at her courage. We'll end this, Em, I promise. Vernon met us early Friday morning, his ancient pickup truck loaded with additional equipment, climbing gear, first aid supplies, powerful flashlights, and a shotgun he placed deliberately on the seat beside him. Conventional weapons won't kill it, he cautioned, noting my expression, but they can slow it down. We followed his truck in my Honda, the 3-hour drive passing in tense silence. Emily clutched Luna in her lap, occasionally reading from the journal, memorizing passages she thought might help us. The weather matched our mood, gray clouds gathering, promising rain by nightfall. As we turned onto the rutted fire road leading to the cabin, a sense of dread settled over me. The forest seemed to press closer, branches reaching like grasping fingers. Even in daylight, shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the trees. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, more vulnerable. Fresh scratches marred its exterior walls, long parallel gouges that hadn't been there during our previous visit. Inside, evidence of unwelcome presence awaited, furniture overturned, cupboard contents scattered across the floor, Emily's pillow shredded. "It's been waiting," Vernon muttered, surveying the destruction. "It knows we've returned." We worked quickly, securing the cabin as best we could while daylight remained. Vernon inscribed strange symbols above doors and windows. "Protective sigils," he explained, "that might buy us time." I nailed iron spikes into the threshold and windowsills, recalling the journal's assertion that cold iron repelled the entity. By late afternoon, we'd transformed the cabin into a fortress of sorts. Rain began to fall as we gathered around Vernon's detailed topographical map, plotting our route to the cave. "Here," Vernon indicated a spot approximately 3 miles northeast of the cabin. "Based on Thornfield's map and modern surveys, the cave entrance should be located along this ridgeline. We'll set out at first light tomorrow." "Why not go now?" Emily asked, glancing nervously at the darkening windows. "The Watcher is strongest at night," Vernon explained gently, "and the terrain is treacherous even in daylight. We need every advantage." He didn't voice the obvious. If we failed to find the cave or to trap the entity, we might never leave these woods alive. As darkness fell completely, we huddled in the main room, a fire blazing in the hearth. Vernon insisted we each carry iron, nails clutched in our palms, the metal cold and reassuring. Emily sat between us on the couch, Luna tucked beneath her arm, as Vernon recounted what he'd learned about the entity over decades of research. The natives called it wechuj, a spirit of insatiable hunger that could possess humans who violated certain taboos. Once possessed, the host would transform gradually, becoming elongated, emaciated, less human with each feeding. Thornfield's journals suggest he discovered a dormant wechuj sealed in a sacred cave. Whether through ignorance or arrogance, he released it, becoming its first modern host. "But why does it watch instead of just attacking?" I asked, glancing toward the window where rain lashed against glass. "It feeds on fear before flesh," Vernon replied grimly. "The longer it observes its prey, the more terror it harvests. Some victims were watched for months before the final attack." Emily shuddered against my side. "It's been watching us for weeks, which means we've become a significant source of nourishment," Vernon confirmed. "It won't relinquish such prey easily." The first scratching began around midnight, soft at first, then increasingly frantic, circling the cabin as though testing our defenses. Emily whimpered, pressing herself against me as Vernon raised the shotgun, his weathered face set in grim lines. "The iron is working," he whispered. "It can't enter." A new sound joined the scratching, a wet, chittering noise like insect mandibles amplified 100-fold. The temperature plummeted suddenly, our breath fogging despite the fire's warmth. Through the window I glimpsed movement, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette circling the cabin, its movements jerky yet purposeful. "Don't look directly at it," Vernon warned sharply. "Direct observation strengthens its connection to you." Hours passed in this state of siege, the entity testing each window, each door, occasionally emitting that terrible metallic scraping noise that set my teeth on edge. Emily eventually fell into exhausted sleep against my shoulder, her face twitching with nightmares I couldn't protect her from. "It's trying to wear us down," Vernon murmured, his eyes red-rimmed from vigilance. "Exhaust us before our journey tomorrow." "Will this work?" I asked quietly, doubt gnawing at me. "Trapping it in the cave?" Vernon's expression revealed his own uncertainty. "The legends say it worked before for centuries, until Thornfield's interference. It's our only hope." Shortly before dawn, the assault intensified. The front door shuddered under tremendous force, the iron nails groaning in their sockets. Windows rattled in their frames. That chittering sound rose to a fever pitch, punctuated by what could only be described as words. Distorted, barely comprehensible, but undeniably human in origin. "Journal, mine." The voice grated like stone on metal. "Child, taste fear." Emily jerked awake with a cry, her eyes wild with terror. I held her tightly as Vernon moved to reinforce the door, pressing his weight against it as something on the other side continued to hammer with inhuman strength. And then, abruptly, it ceased. Dawn's gray light filtered through rain-streaked windows, revealing a forest shrouded in mist. The Watcher had retreated, for now. "We move in 30 minutes, Vernon announced, already checking his equipment. It'll be weaker during daylight but not absent. We must reach the cave by nightfall. As Emily and I gathered our backpacks, I noticed her hands trembling. We can still leave, I told her softly. Drive away. Go somewhere it can't find us. She shook her head resolutely. It would follow. You know it would. She clutched Luna one last time before placing the stuffed wolf carefully on her bed, a talisman left behind, a promise to return. When we stepped onto the porch, the forest seemed to hold its breath. No bird song, no rustling leaves despite the wind. Just silence and the persistent drip of rainwater from saturated branches. Vernon took point, shotgun ready, as we set off into the preternatural stillness, the journal secure in my backpack. Our journey had begun, a desperate gambit against an entity that had hunted these woods for generations. With each step deeper into the forest, I felt its gaze upon us, patient and hungry, waiting for the inevitable moment when our strength would falter. Waiting to feed. The forest closed around us like a living entity, branches reaching as though to impede our progress. Rain continued to fall, a persistent drizzle that soaked through our clothing and rendered the ground treacherous underfoot. Vernon led our small procession with the confidence of a man who had spent decades preparing for this moment, consulting his compass frequently as we navigated increasingly unfamiliar terrain. Emily stayed between us, her face set in determined lines that occasionally cracked to reveal the terrified child beneath. I maintained constant vigilance behind her, checking our backs every few minutes, certain that the watcher tracked our movements from just beyond visual range. We're entering territory that doesn't appear on modern maps, Vernon explained during a brief rest. He indicated a ravine cutting across our path, a deep gash in the earth partially concealed by dense undergrowth. This entire section was deliberately excluded from park surveys in the 1930s at the request of local tribal elders. They knew what was here, I said, understanding dawning. Vernon nodded grimly. They've always known. Their ancestors sealed the cave centuries ago and established a tradition of avoiding this region. White settlers ignored those warnings, built cabins like yours, and people began to disappear. We descended carefully into the ravine, using exposed tree roots as handholds. At the bottom, a narrow stream trickled between moss-covered stones. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with something I couldn't identify but that raised goosebumps on my exposed skin. "Dad," Emily whispered, pointing to our right. "Look." Partially submerged in the stream bed lay the skeletal remains of a deer, or what I initially took for a deer. Closer inspection revealed anatomical impossibilities, too many joints in the legs, a skull elongated beyond natural proportions, eye sockets positioned at unnatural angles. "Not a natural animal," Vernon confirmed, studying the remains with academic detachment. "The entity doesn't just consume its prey, it warps them, changes their fundamental structure." "Like it did to Thornfield," Emily said quietly. "Precisely." Vernon began climbing the opposite side of the ravine. "We're getting close. The transformation accelerates near the cave." The forest beyond the ravine had an ancient quality. Massive trees with trunks wider than our outstretched arms, their canopies forming a cathedral-like dome that further dimmed the already gray daylight. Moss hung in thick curtains, and fungi of shapes and colors I'd never seen sprouted from decaying logs. "No normal wildlife has inhabited this area for generations," Vernon observed as we passed another set of distorted remains, this time something that might once have been a fox. "Only the corrupted survive here, feeding upon each other in endless cycles of distorted consumption." After another hour of increasingly difficult hiking, we reached a steep incline strewn with massive boulders. Vernon pointed to a narrow opening between two of the largest rocks. "There, according to Thornfield's map, that should be the cave entrance." We approached cautiously. The opening resembled a jagged wound in the earth, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. Cold air flowed from its depths, carrying that same acrid scent I'd noticed in the shed where we found the journal. "I'll go first," Vernon decided, switching on his most powerful flashlight. "Felix next, then Emily. Stay close, but if anything happens to me, turn and run. Don't hesitate. Don't look back." He disappeared into the narrow passage. After a tense moment, his voice echoed back. "Clear so far. Come ahead." I helped Emily adjust her backpack to fit through the tight entrance, then followed Vernon into the earth. The passage descended steeply, opening into a larger tunnel whose walls glistened with moisture. Our flashlight beams revealed elaborate carvings, stylized figures with elongated limbs, scenes of hunting and consumption, warnings in a pictographic language lost to time. The natives documented their first encounter with the entity, Vernon whispered, his light tracing one particularly disturbing image of a tall figure emerging from a human body, like a butterfly from a chrysalis, and their method of containing it. The tunnel continued downward, occasionally branching. Vernon navigated with confidence, consulting Thornfield's map at each intersection. The air grew colder, damper, that acrid scent intensifying until it burned my nostrils with each breath. "We're beneath the heart of the old forest now," Vernon explained as we entered a larger chamber. "The deepest part of the cave system should be just ahead." Emily suddenly froze, clutching my arm. "Dad," she whispered, her voice tight with terror. "It's here." In the same instant, our flashlights flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was broken only by our ragged breathing. And then, from somewhere in the blackness ahead, that familiar chittering sound. "Iron," Vernon hissed. "Hold your iron nails." I fumbled in my pocket, extracting the cold metal spikes as Emily pressed against me, trembling. Ahead, yellow eyes blinked open, two glowing points floating in the darkness, watching us with malevolent intelligence. "Journal!" The voice grated through the darkness, no longer distant but terrifyingly close. "Mine!" Vernon's shotgun blast shattered the darkness momentarily, illuminating a scene from Nightmare, the Watcher, fully revealed. Its body resembled a human framework stretched beyond all natural proportion, skin pulled tight over elongated bones. The face retained horrifying hints of what must have been Elias Thornfield. Hollow cheeks, a prominent brow, eyes burning with unnatural light, but distorted into something barely recognizable as human. The entity shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, as the shotgun pellets tore through its emaciated form. It retreated into darkness, but the damage seemed minimal, more annoyance than injury. "The central chamber!" Vernon shouted, his voice echoing through the cave. "Run!" We stumbled forward blindly, one hand trailing along the damp wall for guidance, the other clutching our iron talismans. Behind us, the chittering grew louder, interspersed with that terrible scraping sound, claws on stone pursuing relentlessly. The passage widened suddenly, and we emerged into a vast underground chamber. Our flashlights sputtered back to life, revealing a space larger than I'd imagined possible, a cathedral beneath the earth. Stalactites hung like petrified tears from the distant ceiling, while stalagmites rose from the floor in formations resembling grasping hands. At the chamber's center stood a stone altar, a flat slab surrounded by smaller stones arranged in a pattern that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Ancient symbols covered its surface, partially erased by time but still recognizable as similar to those in Thornfield's journal. "There," Vernon pointed with shaking hand. "That's where it was bound before. We need to recreate the circle and—" The flashlights died again as a howling wind tore through the chamber, carrying the smell of rot and that distinctive acrid scent. The temperature plummeted, my breath clouding before me in the beam of the emergency light I managed to activate. The Watcher entered the chamber, no longer concealing itself in darkness. It moved with unnatural grace despite its distorted proportions, those yellow eyes fixed upon us with terrifying intelligence. In the dim light, I could see the remnants of Thornfield more clearly, tattered clothing still clinging to its frame, a pocket watch chain dangling from its elongated vest, boots stretched to accommodate the impossible length of its feet. "The journal," Vernon demanded, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "We need it now." I fumbled with my backpack, extracting the leather-bound volume as the Watcher stalked closer, its head tilted in an attitude of macabre curiosity. Emily pressed against my side, her small hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "Mine," the Watcher rasped, extending one impossible arm toward us, fingers elongated into claw-like appendages. "Return what was taken." Vernon raised the shotgun again, but the entity moved with blinding speed, crossing the chamber and knocking him aside with casual violence. He slammed against a stalagmite with sickening force, crumpling to the ground. The Watcher turned its attention to us, those burning eyes fixed on the journal in my hands. Time seemed to slow as I made a desperate calculation. Vernon incapacitated, no clear path to the altar, Emily vulnerable beside me. "Take it," I said suddenly, holding the journal toward the watcher. Emily gasped beside me, but I squeezed her hand in silent reassurance. "It's yours. That's what you want, isn't it? Thornfield's journal?" The entity paused, head tilting further until it was at an impossible angle. It seemed to consider my offer, those yellow eyes flickering between my face and the journal. Slowly it extended one grotesque hand. "Mine," it repeated, something like satisfaction in its grating voice. As its claws closed around the journal, I lunged forward, driving an iron nail deep into its emaciated wrist. The watcher shrieked, a sound that threatened to shatter my eardrums as black ichor spurted from the wound. It recoiled, dropping the journal, which fell open to reveal Thornfield's map, the very page we needed. "Emily, run," I shouted, snatching up the fallen journal and sprinting toward the altar. "Get to Vernon." The watcher recovered quickly, its wounded limb already regenerating as it gave chase. I reached the altar seconds before those terrible claws would have closed around my throat, slapping the journal onto the stone surface where it fell open to Thornfield's final entry, a page covered in the same symbols carved into the altar's surface. Emily had reached Vernon, who was conscious but badly injured. "The kerosene," he croaked, fumbling with his pack. "Circle the altar, quickly." As the watcher approached, moving with predatory deliberation now, Emily uncapped the kerosene bottle and began pouring it in a circle around the altar where I stood. The entity seemed cautious, keeping its distance from the forming circuit, those yellow eyes watching with calculating intelligence. "The nails," Vernon called weakly. "Place them at the cardinal points around the circle. Hurry!" With shaking hands, I positioned iron nails at north, south, east, and west points along the kerosene line as Emily completed the circle. The watcher paced just beyond our makeshift barrier, testing for weaknesses, occasionally emitting that terrible chittering sound. "Now what?" I called to Vernon, who had dragged himself to a sitting position against a nearby formation. "Read the journal," he instructed. "The final entry, out loud." I turned to the open page, struggling to decipher Thornfield's increasingly deranged handwriting. The watcher grew more agitated as I began to read, its movements becoming erratic, desperate. "I have unleashed something ancient beyond reckoning," I read, the words seeming to echo with unnatural resonance in the vast chamber. "It fills me, changes me, consumes me from within. I cannot undo what I have done, but perhaps I can contain it as the natives did before." The watcher shrieked, launching itself toward me, only to recoil as it reached the kerosene line. Emily, following Vernon's weak gestures, struck a match and touched it to the circle. Flames erupted instantly, racing around the altar in a perfect ring of fire that cast grotesque shadows across the chamber walls. "With these words I bind thee," I continued, the journal's pages turning of their own accord now, revealing text I hadn't seen before, words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. "By iron and fire, by blood and bone, by name and nature, I return thee to thy prison." The watcher convulsed as though the words themselves caused physical pain. Its form seemed to flicker, momentarily revealing the human Thornfield must once have been, a bearded man in 19th century attire, eyes wide with horror and recognition. "Elias Thornfield," I read the final line, understanding suddenly what was required. "I release you." The entity screamed, a sound both inhuman and terribly recognizably human. It clawed at itself as though trying to separate from its own form. The flames around the altar rose higher, their color shifting from orange to an unnatural blue that cast everything in ghostly light. "The final step," Vernon called, his voice weakening. "Your blood, a drop on the journal." Without hesitation, I pressed one of the iron nails into my palm, drawing blood that fell onto Thornfield's final page. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The watcher's form began to tear apart, the parasitic entity separating from what remained of Thornfield's human form. The chamber filled with a whirlwind of darkness, a writhing mass of shadow and malevolence that howled with voices that seemed to contain centuries of consumed victims. "Get down!" Vernon shouted as the vortex intensified. I dove from the altar, tackling Emily to the ground as the maelstrom reached its peak. The separated entity, now a formless mass of darkness shot through with those terrible yellow eyes, was drawn inexorably toward the altar, compressing into a singularity of pure malevolence before being absorbed into the stone itself. Thornfield's remains, little more than a skeleton in tattered clothing, collapsed to the chamber floor. Silence fell, broken only by our ragged breathing and the fading crackle of flames. The air cleared, that acrid scent replaced by the natural dampness of the cave. Our flashlights sputtered back to life, revealing the chamber in normal illumination. "Is it over?" Emily whispered, her voice small in the vast space. Vernon nodded weakly, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "The binding is complete. It's trapped once more, as it was before Thornfield released it." I approached the altar cautiously. The journal remained open to that final page, but the text had changed, transformed into warnings similar to those the natives had carved centuries earlier. The message was clear: do not disturb, do not release, do not forget. "We should go," I said, helping Vernon to his feet, "before anything else decides we're unwelcome." "The journal stays," Vernon insisted as I reached for it. "It belongs here as part of the binding." I nodded, understanding. With one last look at the altar, at Thornfield's pathetic remains beside it, we began our journey back through the twisting passages, toward daylight and safety. The ascent seemed easier somehow, as though the cave itself was eager for our departure. When we finally emerged into fading afternoon light, the forest felt different, still ancient, still mysterious, but no longer malevolent. Natural sounds had returned: birdsong, rustling leaves, the distant call of a hawk. Our journey back to the cabin passed without incident, though Vernon's injuries slowed our progress considerably. By the time we reached the clearing, stars were appearing in the darkening sky, ordinary darkness now, free from supernatural dread. Emily ran ahead to the porch, turning back with the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "Luna's still here," she called, disappearing inside to retrieve her stuffed wolf. "It's really over?" I asked Vernon as we approached the cabin more slowly. "The entity is bound again," he confirmed. "But such bindings aren't permanent, merely long-term containment. Decades from now, perhaps centuries, someone else might stumble upon that cave, might release what we imprisoned today. Then we need to ensure no one does," I said firmly. "Warning signs, restricted access, whatever it takes." Vernon nodded wearily. "I have connections at the Park Service, the Historical Society. We'll find a way to protect the site without drawing attention to what it contains." That night we slept soundly for the first time in weeks. No scratching at the doors, no yellow eyes watching from darkness. In the morning we packed our belongings in comfortable silence, each processing what we had experienced, what we had overcome. As we prepared to leave, Emily paused on the porch, looking back at the cabin with an expression beyond her years. "We're never coming back here, are we?" "No, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "This chapter of our lives is closed." She nodded, clutching Luna against her chest. "Good." 22 years have passed since that final confrontation in the depths of the Shenandoah. Emily is a grown woman now, with a successful career in anthropology, inspired perhaps by Vernon's influence during her formative years. We never returned to that cabin, never set foot in those particular woods again. Vernon died peacefully 5 years after our ordeal, having dedicated his remaining time to establishing protections around the cave site, classified archaeological restrictions, tribal spiritual boundaries, and Park Service limitations that ensure no casual hiker will stumble upon that terrible altar. I still dream of the Watcher sometimes, those yellow eyes observing from darkness, that terrible chittering sound echoing through forest silence. On such nights I check the locks twice, draw the curtains tight, and remind myself that some horrors once confronted lose their power over us. But I never hike in forests alone, never linger in deep woods as daylight fades. And when Emily calls to tell me she's planning a camping trip with friends or colleagues, I can't help but warn her. Check the weather forecasts carefully, I say. Never venture out when storms are predicted, and always watch for unusual tracks after the rain. The decision to escape to my uncle's cabin came during one of those late nights at the office, when the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz with the same intensity as my frayed nerves. I am Griffin Mulligan, Senior Account Manager at Westfield Marketing Solutions, and by February of this year, I was dangerously close to what my therapist would probably call a complete psychological breakdown. Life in Boston had become a pressure cooker. The divorce papers from Elaine sat half-signed on my kitchen counter. My boss had started sending emails at 3 a.m. expecting immediate responses, and my apartment felt less like a home and more like a way station between stress-filled days. When my phone lit up with Holden's name that Wednesday night, I was staring at spreadsheets that had long since blurred into meaningless patterns. "Griff, my man," Holden's voice boomed through the speaker. "I've got the solution to all your problems. Your uncle still has that cabin up in New Hampshire, right? The one near White Mountain?" Holden, Reeves, and I had been friends since our freshman year at UMass, when we'd bonded over cheap beer and a shared hatred of calculus. Where I had chosen the corporate path, Holden had bounced between jobs: bartender, freelance graphic designer, and currently tech support specialist. What he lacked in career ambition, he made up for with boundless enthusiasm for fringe theories and weekend adventures. "Yeah, Uncle Jerry still has it. He hasn't been up there in ages, though," I replied, rubbing my eyes. "Perfect. I already called Sage. We're going this weekend. No excuses." Sage Collins completed our unlikely trio. She'd transferred to UMass our junior year and quickly integrated herself into our friendship with her perpetual optimism and gentle prodding to expand our consciousness. Now she worked at a wellness center, guiding meditation sessions and selling homemade essential oils. The crystal pendant she never removed had become something of a trademark. "I don't know, Holden," I hesitated, though a part of me was already warming to the idea. "I've got a presentation on Monday, and you'll do better if you're not a complete wreck," he interrupted. "Come on, man. When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" He had a point. I couldn't remember. So that's how I found myself, 2 days later, packing my old Subaru with sleeping bags, coolers of food, and more flannel than any reasonable person should own. Holden claimed shotgun immediately, his 6-foot frame folding awkwardly into the passenger seat, while Sage situated herself in the back, surrounded by her bags of organic snacks and what she called her emergency crystal kit. "This is exactly what your aura needs, Griffin," Sage said, leaning forward between the seats. Her blonde dreadlocks swayed as she nodded seriously. "It's been this murky brown color for months. We need to get you back to a nice, vibrant blue." Holden snorted. "I think he needs beer more than crystals, Sage." "He can have both," she replied serenely. The 5-hour drive north stretched to 7, with Holden insisting we stop at a UFO museum. This could be important research, guys. A roadside stand selling homemade jerky. You can't get venison like this in Boston. And what he claimed was the site of a 1950s government mind control experiment, but looked suspiciously like an abandoned gas station. By the time we turned onto the dirt road leading to Uncle Jerry's cabin, darkness had settled over the forest. Bare branches scratched against the car like skeletal fingers, and the headlights illuminated only a narrow tunnel ahead, the dense woods swallowing the light beyond. "This is horror movie 101, Holden commented, peering through the windshield. "Isolated cabin, 3 unsuspecting victims, pitch black forest." "Don't be dramatic," I said, though the thought had crossed my mind. The cabin appeared around the final bend, a dark silhouette against the night sky. It was smaller than I remembered, a simple 1-story structure with a pitched roof and a small porch. Uncle Jerry had built it himself in the 70s, a retreat from his job as a high school principal. Now retired and living in Florida, he rarely made the trip north. As I cut the engine, a profound silence descended, broken only by the ticking of the cooling car and the distant call of an owl. The air felt heavy, cold, and somehow expectant. "We're here," I announced unnecessarily. Sage was the first out of the car, stretching her arms toward the sky. "Oh my God, the energy here is incredible. Do you feel that? It's so primal." Holden grabbed a duffel bag and his ever-present backpack. "I feel like I need to take a leak after that drive. Let's get inside." The key was where Uncle Jerry always kept it, under a false rock by the porch steps. The door opened with a protesting creak, releasing the musty scent of disuse. I fumbled for the light switch, and a single overhead bulb flickered to life, revealing a space frozen in time. Wood paneling covered the walls, decorated with faded photographs of fishing trips and mounted antlers. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by sagging armchairs and a worn plaid couch. The kitchenette in the corner consisted of a small refrigerator, a two-burner stove, and open shelves holding mismatched dishes. 2 small bedrooms branched off from the main room, along with a bathroom that I knew contained a shower with unpredictable water pressure. "Man, this place is a dump," Holden said, kicking an empty beer can across the floor. Dust motes swirled in the light. "It's got character," Sage replied, smiling as she placed her hand on the rough wooden walls like she was communing with the spirit of the cabin itself. I chuckled. "Yeah, well, it's free, so I'm not complaining." We unpacked quickly, stowing our food in the ancient refrigerator and claiming our sleeping spaces. I took Uncle Jerry's room with its queen-sized bed and fishing magazines stacked in the corner. Sage took the second bedroom, while Holden declared himself perfectly happy on the couch. Within an hour, we had a fire crackling in the fireplace, beers opened, and the initial chill of the cabin fading. Holden had brought along his portable speaker, and the low hum of classic rock provided a comforting background to our conversation. "So," Holden said, cracking open his third beer, "did your uncle ever tell you about any weird things happening up here? Strange lights in the sky, missing hikers, unexplained phenomena?" His eyebrows waggled suggestively. I rolled my eyes. "It's just a normal cabin in the woods, Holden." "No place is just normal," Sage interjected, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Every location has its own energy, its own history. These mountains have been here long before people built cabins on them." "See?" Holden gestured toward her with his beer. "Sage gets it. Old places have secrets." He leaned forward, his voice dropping dramatically. "Did you know the White Mountains have some of the highest concentrations of unexplained disappearances in the country? People just walk into these woods and never come out." "That's because they're unprepared for wilderness hiking," I countered. "Is that what they want you to think?" Holden raised an eyebrow. The conversation meandered from there, through Holden's latest conspiracy theories, Sage's new meditation techniques, and my work frustrations. The familiar rhythm of our friendship eased the tension I'd been carrying for months. For the first time in a long while, I felt my shoulders relaxing, my mind clearing. That's when we heard it. A heavy thump against the exterior wall, like something substantial had struck the cabin. We all froze mid-conversation. "What the hell was that?" Holden asked, his eyes wide. "Probably just a raccoon or something," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "That was way too loud for a raccoon," Sage whispered, her earlier serenity replaced by wariness. We waited in silence, but no further sound came. After a few minutes, Sage suggested we check it out. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from my backpack and we stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath our feet. The night air hit me like a physical force, colder now, with a strange electrical quality that raised the hair on my arms. I swept the flashlight beam across the clearing around the cabin, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. "See? Nothing to worry about," I said, though I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. As we turned to go back inside, the beam of my flashlight caught something at the edge of the woods, a momentary reflection, like eyes catching the light, too high off the ground to belong to any normal forest creature. Then it was gone, so quickly I couldn't be sure I'd seen it at all. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight. "See what?" Holden had already turned back toward the door. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Nothing, just my imagination." But as I followed them back inside, I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder one more time at the dark wall of trees surrounding us. Something didn't feel right. It was as if the forest itself had become aware of our presence and was watching. I slept fitfully that night, drifting in and out of troubled dreams filled with shadowy figures moving just beyond my field of vision. The cabin creaked and settled around me, ordinary noises that my sleep-deprived mind transformed into something sinister. When morning finally arrived, I was almost relieved to see sunlight filtering through the dusty curtains. The smell of coffee drew me to the main room, where Sage was already up, sitting cross-legged on a threadbare rug by the window, Her eyes were closed, hands resting on her knees, palms upward. "Morning," I said quietly, not wanting to disturb her meditation. Her eyes opened slowly. "Your energy is disturbed, Griffin. Did you sleep poorly?" I grabbed a mug and poured myself coffee from the ancient percolator. "Is it that obvious?" "The shadows under your eyes tell the story," she said, uncrossing her legs and standing in one fluid motion. "I didn't sleep well either. This place, it has an unusual vibration." Holden emerged from the bathroom, hair wet from a shower, looking surprisingly energetic. "Morning, campers. Who's ready for some wilderness adventure?" After a breakfast of Sage's homemade granola and some questionable eggs from the local store Holden had insisted on stopping at, we decided to explore the surrounding woods. The day was crisp but sunny, perfect for hiking. Uncle Jerry had kept a crude map of the area pinned to the kitchen wall, showing various trails and landmarks. "There's a ridge about 2 miles east that supposedly has a great view," I suggested, studying the faded pencil lines. "Boring," Holden declared. "What's this area marked 'Do Not Enter'?" He pointed to a section of the map where Uncle Jerry had scrawled those words in red. "Probably private property," I said. "Or a secret government testing facility," Holden countered with a grin. Sage leaned over the map. "It's near a stream. Water sources often have powerful energy. I'd like to see it." I was outvoted, and by mid-morning, we were trekking through the forest toward the forbidden area. The woods were beautiful in the daylight, tall pines reaching toward the sky, patches of melting snow creating small rivulets that crisscrossed our path, the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Sage was in her element, stopping frequently to examine plants or close her eyes and feel the forest's energy. "This place is alive in a way the city never is," she said, her face upturned to catch a shaft of sunlight breaking through the canopy. "Each tree has its own life force, its own story." Holden, walking ahead, called back, "Yeah, and I bet some of those stories would make great horror movies." I found myself relaxing as we walked. The exercise felt good after months of desk work, and there was something cleansing about the clean, pine-scented air. Maybe this trip had been a good idea after all. About an hour into our hike, the character of the forest began to change. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks twisted into strange shapes. Moss hung from branches like tattered curtains, and the ground underfoot became spongy with decomposing vegetation. Even the light seemed different, greener, more diffuse, as if filtered through layers of time itself. "We must be getting close to that marked area," I said, pulling out the photocopy of the map I'd made before leaving. "Look at these trees," Sage whispered, running her hand along a trunk that curved like a spine with scoliosis. "They're in pain." "Trees don't feel pain, Sage," I said automatically, though I had to admit there was something disturbing about the way they grew, as if reaching away from something. "All living things feel, Griffin," she replied, "and something has hurt this place." Holden had wandered a few yards ahead and suddenly called out, "Guys, you need to see this." We hurried to where he stood, crouched down examining something on the ground. As I approached, I saw what had caught his attention, a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were large, easily twice the size of a human footprint, but with an unsettling shape, elongated, with what looked like 5-pointed toe marks at the front. Most disturbing was the clear impression of claws extending from each toe, digging deep into the soft soil. "What the hell made these?" Holden asked, his voice hushed with excitement and trepidation. I knelt beside him, studying the prints. "I don't know, they're too big for a bear or wolf." "And look," he pointed, "they're bipedal. Whatever made these walks on 2 legs?" A chill ran down my spine despite the afternoon warmth. 2-legged with massive clawed feet. Nothing native to New Hampshire fit that description. "There's something else," Sage said, pointing to faint marks alongside the prints. "It looks like something was being dragged." She was right. Parallel lines ran beside the tracks, as if the creature had been pulling something heavy through the forest. "We should follow them," Holden said immediately. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "What if this thing is still around?" "Come on, Griff. Where's your sense of adventure? This could be an undiscovered species. Or it could be dangerous," I countered. "I think we should follow them," Sage said quietly, surprising me. "But carefully. This is significant somehow. I can feel it." Again outvoted, I reluctantly agreed. though I kept glancing over my shoulder as we tracked the strange prints deeper into the woods. The trees grew even more twisted here, and I noticed that many had deep gouges in their trunks, long vertical scratches that peeled away the bark to expose the pale wood beneath. "Claw marks," Holden whispered, running his fingers along one set of gouges. Whatever made those tracks did this too. Why would something claw trees like this? I wondered aloud. "Territorial marking," Holden suggested, "like how bears scratch trees to mark their territory." "Or it's sharpening its claws," Sage added, her face unusually pale. The tracks led us to a small clearing where a stream cut through the forest floor. Under normal circumstances, it would have been picturesque, sunlight dappling the water, ferns growing along the banks. But the scene before us was far from idyllic. In the center of the clearing stood a large dead tree, its bark completely stripped away in places. Deep gashes scarred its pale trunk, some so deep they nearly cut through to the other side. Around the base of the tree, the ground was disturbed, churned up as if something had been digging or thrashing around. Most disturbing of all was the dark stain that spread across the ground and up the tree trunk. It looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Jesus," I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. Sage was unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the tree. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her crystal pendant. "I don't like this, guys. It feels wrong." For once, Holden seemed at a loss for words. He circled the tree cautiously, examining the gashes. "These aren't just random," he finally said. "They form a pattern." He pointed out how some of the marks intersected to create what looked almost like crude symbols. "What kind of animal makes symbolic claw marks?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Not an animal," Holden replied softly. "At least not a normal one." A twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We all whirled around, hearts pounding. Nothing visible moved among the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "We should go," Sage whispered urgently. "Now." No one argued this time. We turned to head back the way we'd come when a low, guttural sound broke the silence, a sort of rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate from the trees themselves. It wasn't loud, but something about it sent primal fear coursing through my body. "Run," I said quietly, then louder as branches began to crack in the distance. "Run!" We bolted, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the path, driven by pure instinct. I could hear heavy movement behind us, something large pushing through the forest, moving faster than seemed possible. The sounds grew closer, and panic drove me to greater speed. A branch whipped across my face, drawing blood, but I barely noticed. Sage stumbled ahead of me, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her along. Holden led the way, his lanky frame surprisingly quick among the trees. "There," he shouted, pointing ahead to where the forest thinned. We burst from the tree line back onto the main trail, gasping for breath. The sounds of pursuit faded, but we didn't slow our pace until the cabin came into view. We slammed the door behind us, all three collapsing on the floor in the main room, our chests heaving from exertion and fear. "What the fuck was that?" Holden gasped between breaths. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we know what made those tracks now." Sage sat with her back against the wall, eyes closed, still clutching her pendant. "This place is wrong," she whispered. "There's something here that shouldn't be." As our breathing slowed and the initial panic subsided, we tried to make sense of what had happened. Holden, ever the theorist, was the first to offer explanations. "Maybe it's some kind of cryptid," he suggested, "like Bigfoot or something." "That was no Bigfoot," I argued. "Those tracks weren't ape-like at all." "Skinwalker?" Holden tried again. "Native American legends talk about witches who could transform into animals." Sage shook her head. "This feels older somehow, more elemental." As we debated, the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. None of us suggested going back outside, even to retrieve firewood from the pile by the porch. Instead, we huddled in the main room, keeping the lights on and speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid of being overheard. "We should leave," Sage said finally, "first thing tomorrow morning." Part of me wanted to agree immediately, to pack up and drive away from whatever lurked in those woods. But another part, a stubborn, curious part, wanted answers. "If we leave, we'll never know what it was," I said slowly. "Sometimes not knowing is better," Sage replied, her eyes serious. I'm with Griffin, Holden declared. We came here for an adventure, right? This is definitely turning into one. Sage looked between us, her expression troubled. I have a very bad feeling about this. That thing in the woods, it felt like it was hunting us. We'll be careful, I promised. One more day. We'll stick together, stay close to the cabin. If anything else happens, we leave immediately. She reluctantly agreed, though the worry never left her face. As night fell, we secured the cabin as best we could, checking locks, pulling curtains closed, even moving the heavy bookcase in front of the back door. Holden found an old hunting knife in one of the kitchen drawers and kept it close at hand. We tried to maintain some normalcy, playing cards and sharing the last of our beers, but the atmosphere remained tense. Every creak of the cabin's old boards, every rustle of wind in the trees outside sent us into momentary silence, listening intently. Around midnight, just as we were considering turning in for the night, there was a loud crash outside. This time it sounded like something had hit the side of the cabin with considerable force. The walls actually shook from the impact. "What the hell is that?" Holden shouted, jumping to his feet and grabbing the knife. "Stay here," I said, grabbing the flashlight. "I'll check it out." "Are you crazy? I'm coming with you," Holden insisted, gripping the knife tightly. Sage looked like she wanted to protest, but just nodded, clutching a large kitchen knife she'd retrieved from the drawer. "Be careful," she whispered. The three of us moved to the front door, hesitating only briefly before I pulled it open. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, a musky, acrid odor that made my nose wrinkle. We stepped onto the porch, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Nothing moved in the immediate vicinity of the cabin. I directed my light to the side where we'd heard the impact and saw splintered wood. Something had struck the cabin with enough force to damage the exterior wall. "Look," Sage whispered, pointing to the ground. In the dirt by the cabin, there was a fresh print, the same elongated five-toed track we'd seen in the woods earlier, but even more disturbing were the marks on the damaged section of wall. When I directed my flashlight there, I could clearly see 5 parallel gouges in the wood, claw marks. "It's testing the cabin," Holden said, his voice unnaturally high, "checking for weaknesses." Before I could respond, movement caught my eye, a large, dark shape moving quickly through the trees at the edge of the clearing. The flashlight beam only caught it for an instant, but what I saw turned my blood to ice. It was tall, at least 7 feet, moving on 2 legs with a strange, fluid grace that no human could match. Its body seemed almost skeletal, with 2 long limbs and what looked like patchy dark fur or hair covering parts of it. But it was the face, or what should have been a face, that truly horrified me. In the brief moment the light caught it, I saw no features, just a blank, smooth surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. "Jesus Christ," I gasped, involuntarily taking a step back. "Did you see that?" Holden asked, his voice trembling. "Yeah," I managed to say, my mouth dry with fear. "Let's get back inside." We bolted back into the cabin, slamming the door behind us. Holden locked it, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the deadbolt. Sage was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What the hell was that thing?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's not natural." We spent the rest of the night huddled in the main room, too terrified to separate into different sleeping areas. No one slept much. Every sound outside had us tensing. Every shadow seemed to move with malevolent intent. By morning we were exhausted but determined to leave as quickly as possible. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, we began gathering our things, speaking little and moving with the efficiency of shared fear. We were nearly finished packing when Sage, looking out the kitchen window, suddenly gasped. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Look at the car." I rushed to her side, peering through the glass. My Subaru sat where we'd left it, but it was no longer in the same condition. Deep gouges ran across the hood and doors. All 4 tires were slashed to ribbons, and written in what looked like claw marks across the windshield was a crude symbol, the same pattern we'd seen carved into the tree in the clearing. We were trapped. I slept fitfully that night, drifting in and out of troubled dreams filled with shadowy figures moving just beyond my field of vision. The cabin creaked and settled around me, ordinary noises that my sleep-deprived mind transformed into something sinister. When morning finally arrived, I was almost relieved to see sunlight filtering through the dusty curtains. The smell of coffee drew me to the main room, where Sage was already up, sitting cross-legged on a threadbare rug by the window. Her eyes were closed, hands resting on her knees, palms upward. "Morning," I said quietly, not wanting to disturb her meditation. Her eyes opened slowly. "Your energy is disturbed, Griffin. Did you sleep poorly?" I grabbed a mug and poured myself coffee from the ancient percolator. "Is it that obvious?" "The shadows under your eyes tell the story," she said, uncrossing her legs and standing in one fluid motion. "I didn't sleep well either. This place, it has an unusual vibration." Holden emerged from the bathroom, hair wet from a shower, looking surprisingly energetic. "Morning, campers. Who's ready for some wilderness adventure?" After a breakfast of Sage's homemade granola and some questionable eggs from the local store Holden had insisted on stopping at, we decided to explore the surrounding woods. The day was crisp but sunny, perfect for hiking. Uncle Jerry had kept a crude map of the area pinned to the kitchen wall, showing various trails and landmarks. "There's a ridge about 2 miles east that supposedly has a great view," I suggested, studying the faded pencil lines. "Boring," Holden declared. "What's this area marked 'Do Not Enter'?" He pointed to a section of the map where Uncle Jerry had scrawled those words in red. "Probably private property," I said. "Or a secret government testing facility," Holden countered with a grin. Sage leaned over the map. "It's near a stream. Water sources often have powerful energy. I'd like to see it." I was outvoted, and by mid-morning we were trekking through the forest toward the forbidden area. The woods were beautiful in the daylight, tall pines reaching toward the sky, patches of melting snow creating small rivulets that crisscrossed our path, the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Sage was in her element, stopping frequently to examine plants or close her eyes and feel the forest's energy. "This place is alive in a way the city never is," she said, her face upturned to catch a shaft of sunlight breaking through the canopy. "Each tree has its own life force, its own story." Holden, walking ahead, called back, "Yeah, and I bet some of those stories would make great horror movies." I found myself relaxing as we walked. The exercise felt good after months of desk work, and there was something cleansing about the clean, pine-scented air. Maybe this trip had been a good idea after all. About an hour into our hike, the character of the forest began to change. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks twisted into strange shapes. Moss hung from branches like tattered curtains, and the ground underfoot became spongy with decomposing vegetation. Even the light seemed different, greener, more diffuse, as if filtered through layers of time itself. "We must be getting close to that marked area," I said, pulling out the photocopy of the map I'd made before leaving. "Look at these trees," Sage whispered, running her hand along a trunk that curved like a spine with scoliosis. "They're in pain." "Trees don't feel pain, Sage," I said automatically, though I had to admit there was something disturbing about the way they grew, as if reaching away from something. "All living things feel, Griffin," she replied, "and something has hurt this place." Holden had wandered a few yards ahead and suddenly called out, "Guys, you need to see this." We hurried to where he stood, crouched down examining something on the ground. As I approached, I saw what had caught his attention, a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were large, easily twice the size of a human footprint, but with an unsettling shape, elongated, with what looked like 5-pointed toe marks at the front. Most disturbing was the clear impression of claws extending from each toe, digging deep into the soft soil. "What the hell made these?" Holden asked, his voice hushed with excitement and trepidation. I knelt beside him, studying the prints. "I don't know. They're too big for a bear or wolf." "And look," he pointed, "they're bipedal. Whatever made these walks on 2 legs?" A chill ran down my spine despite the afternoon warmth. 2-legged with massive clawed feet? Nothing native to New Hampshire fit that description. "There's something else," Sage said, pointing to faint marks alongside the prints. "It looks like something was being dragged." She was right. Parallel lines ran beside the tracks, as if the creature had been pulling something heavy through the forest. "We should follow them," Holden said immediately. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "What if this thing is still around?" "Come on, Griff. Where's your sense of adventure? This could be an undiscovered species. Or it could be dangerous, I countered. I think we should follow them, Sage said quietly, surprising me. But carefully. This is significant somehow. I can feel it. Again outvoted, I reluctantly agreed, though I kept glancing over my shoulder as we tracked the strange prints deeper into the woods. The trees grew even more twisted here, and I noticed that many had deep gouges in their trunks, long vertical scratches that peeled away the bark to expose the pale wood beneath. Claw marks, Holden whispered, running his fingers along one set of gouges. Whatever made those tracks did this too. Why would something claw trees like this? I wondered aloud. Territorial marking, Holden suggested, like how bears scratch trees to mark their territory. Or it's sharpening its claws, Sage added, her face unusually pale. The tracks led us to a small clearing where a stream cut through the forest floor. Under normal circumstances, it would have been picturesque, sunlight dappling the water, ferns growing along the banks. But the scene before us was far from idyllic. In the center of the clearing stood a large dead tree, its bark completely stripped away in places. Deep gashes scarred its pale trunk, some so deep they nearly cut through to the other side. Around the base of the tree, the ground was disturbed, churned up as if something had been digging or thrashing around. Most disturbing of all was the dark stain that spread across the ground and up the tree trunk. It looked disturbingly like dried blood. Jesus, I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. Sage was unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the tree. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her crystal pendant. I don't like this, guys. It feels wrong. For once, Holden seemed at a loss for words. He circled the tree cautiously, examining the gashes. These aren't just random, he finally said. They form a pattern. He pointed out how some of the marks intersected to create what looked almost like crude symbols. What kind of animal makes symbolic claw marks? I asked, my mouth dry. Not an animal, Holden replied softly. At least not a normal one. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We all whirled around, hearts pounding. Nothing visible moved among the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We should go, Sage whispered urgently. Now. No one argued this time. We turned to head back the way we'd come when a low guttural sound broke the silence, a sort of rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate from the trees themselves. It wasn't loud, but something about it sent primal fear coursing through my body. Run, I said quietly, then louder as branches began to crack in the distance. Run! We bolted, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the path, driven by pure instinct. I could hear heavy movement behind us, something large pushing through the forest, moving faster than seemed possible. The sounds grew closer, and panic drove me to greater speed. A branch whipped across my face, drawing blood, but I barely noticed. Sage stumbled ahead of me, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her along. Holden led the way, his lanky frame surprisingly quick among the trees. There, he shouted, pointing ahead to where the forest thinned. We burst from the tree line back onto the main trail, gasping for breath. The sounds of pursuit faded, but we didn't slow our pace until the cabin came into view. We slammed the door behind us, all three collapsing on the floor in the main room, our chests heaving from exertion and fear. What the fuck was that? Holden gasped between breaths. I don't know, I admitted, but I think we know what made those tracks now. Sage sat with her back against the wall, eyes closed, still clutching her pendant. This place is wrong, she whispered. There's something here that shouldn't be. As our breathing slowed and the initial panic subsided, we tried to make sense of what had happened. Holden, ever the theorist, was the first to offer explanations. Maybe it's some kind of cryptid, he suggested, like Bigfoot or something. That was no Bigfoot, I argued. Those tracks weren't ape-like at all. Skinwalker? Holden tried again. Native American legends talk about witches who could transform into animals. Sage shook her head. This feels older somehow, more elemental. As we debated, the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. None of us suggested going back outside, even to retrieve firewood from the pile by the porch. Instead, we huddled in the main room, keeping the lights on and speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid of being overheard. We should leave, Sage said finally. First thing tomorrow morning. Part of me wanted to agree immediately to pack up and drive away from whatever lurked in those woods. But another part, a stubborn, curious part, wanted answers. "If we leave, we'll never know what it was," I said slowly. "Sometimes not knowing is better," Sage replied, her eyes serious. "I'm with Griffin," Holden declared. "We came here for an adventure, right? This is definitely turning into one." Sage looked between us, her expression troubled. "I have a very bad feeling about this. That thing in the woods, it felt like it was hunting us." "We'll be careful," I promised. "One more day. We'll stick together, stay close to the cabin. If anything else happens, we leave immediately." She reluctantly agreed, though the worry never left her face. As night fell, we secured the cabin as best we could, checking locks, pulling curtains closed, even moving the heavy bookcase in front of the back door. Holden found an old hunting knife in one of the kitchen drawers and kept it close at hand. We tried to maintain some normalcy, playing cards and sharing the last of our beers, but the atmosphere remained tense. Every creak of the cabin's old boards, every rustle of wind in the trees outside sent us into momentary silence, listening intently. Around midnight, just as we were considering turning in for the night, there was a loud crash outside. This time it sounded like something had hit the side of the cabin with considerable force. The walls actually shook from the impact. "What the hell is that?" Holden shouted, jumping to his feet and grabbing the knife. "Stay here," I said, grabbing the flashlight. "I'll check it out." "Are you crazy? I'm coming with you," Holden insisted, gripping the knife tightly. Sage looked like she wanted to protest, but just nodded, clutching a large kitchen knife she'd retrieved from the drawer. "Be careful," she whispered. The three of us moved to the front door, hesitating only briefly before I pulled it open. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, a musky, acrid odor that made my nose wrinkle. We stepped onto the porch, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Nothing moved in the immediate vicinity of the cabin. I directed my light to the side where we'd heard the impact and saw splintered wood. Something had struck the cabin with enough force to damage the exterior wall. "Look," Sage whispered, pointing to the ground. In the dirt by the cabin, there was a fresh print, the same elongated five-toed track we'd seen in the woods earlier. But even more disturbing were the marks on the damaged section of wall. When I directed my flashlight there, I could clearly see 5 parallel gouges in the wood, claw marks. "It's testing the cabin," Holden said, his voice unnaturally high, "checking for weaknesses." Before I could respond, movement caught my eye, a large dark shape moving quickly through the trees at the edge of the clearing. The flashlight beam only caught it for an instant, but what I saw turned my blood to ice. It was tall, at least 7 feet, moving on 2 legs with a strange, fluid grace that no human could match. Its body seemed almost skeletal, with 2 long limbs and what looked like patchy, dark fur or hair covering parts of it. But it was the face, or what should have been a face, that truly horrified me. In the brief moment the light caught it, I saw no features, just a blank, smooth surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. "Jesus Christ," I gasped, involuntarily taking a step back. "Did you see that?" Holden asked, his voice trembling. "Yeah," I managed to say, my mouth dry with fear. "Let's get back inside." We bolted back into the cabin, slamming the door behind us. Holden locked it, his hand shaking so badly he could barely manage the deadbolt. Sage was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What the hell was that thing?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's not natural." We spent the rest of the night huddled in the main room, too terrified to separate into different sleeping areas. No one slept much. Every sound outside had us tensing. Every shadow seemed to move with malevolent intent. By morning we were exhausted but determined to leave as quickly as possible. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, we began gathering our things, speaking little and moving with the efficiency of shared fear. We were nearly finished packing when Sage, looking out the kitchen window, suddenly gasped. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Look at the car." I rushed to her side, peering through the glass. My Subaru sat where we'd left it, but it was no longer in the same condition. Deep gouges ran across the hood and doors. All 4 tires were slashed to ribbons, and written in what looked like claw marks across the windshield was a crude symbol, the same pattern we'd seen carved into the tree in the clearing. We were trapped. "This can't be happening," Holden whispered, his face pressed against the window beside me. His breath fogged the glass as we stared at my mutilated Subaru. This cannot be fucking happening. I stepped back, mind racing. My car was our only way out. The nearest town was over 15 miles away, a long hike under normal circumstances, but with that thing in the woods, a death sentence. Cell service? Sage asked, already pulling out her phone. I checked mine. Nothing? You? She shook her head. Holden's phone showed the same. No bars, no help. The landline, I suggested, moving to the ancient rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall. I lifted the receiver to my ear and felt my stomach drop. Dead silence, not even a dial tone. I jiggled the connection, but nothing changed. It's dead. Of course it is. Holden laughed humorlessly. Classic horror movie setup. Next we'll start getting picked off one by one. Not helping, Holden, Sage snapped, her usual serenity nowhere to be found. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to think clearly despite the fog of fear clouding my mind. Okay, we need to figure out what we're dealing with and how to protect ourselves until help comes. What help? Holden asked. No one knows we're here except your uncle, and he's in Florida. He expects me to call him when we leave, I explained. If he doesn't hear from me by tomorrow night, he might call someone to check on us. Tomorrow night? Holden's voice rose in pitch. That thing could be inside the cabin by lunchtime. Then we need to fortify, I said firmly, surprising myself with my own resolve. Board up the windows, barricade the doors, turn this place into a fortress. Sage nodded, seeming to draw strength from the concrete plan. And we need weapons, real ones, not just kitchen knives. I remembered Uncle Jerry's hunting days. Checked the bedroom closets and under the beds. Uncle Jerry was big on hunting. He might have left something here. We split up to search the cabin. I took the main bedroom, methodically checking every drawer, closet, and potential hiding spot. Under the bed, I found an old metal toolbox. Inside were basic tools, hammer, screwdrivers, pliers. Not ideal weapons, but better than nothing. Found something, Holden called from the living room. He was examining the mounted deer head above the fireplace. There's a key taped to the back of this thing. He pulled down a small brass key, holding it up triumphantly. Gun cabinet, I realized. Uncle Jerry always kept his hunting rifles locked up. It took us 10 minutes of searching to find the cabinet, a narrow wooden case built into what looked like a normal panel of wall beside the fireplace. The key fit perfectly, and inside we found 2 rifles and a shotgun, along with several boxes of ammunition. Do you know how to use these? Sage asked, looking uncomfortable as I handed her a rifle. Basic stuff, I admitted. Uncle Jerry taught me when I was a teenager, but I'm no expert. Better than nothing, Holden said, examining the shotgun with an expression somewhere between fear and fascination. We set the weapons aside and began fortifying the cabin. Using the tools from the toolbox, we removed shelves from the walls and used the wood to board up windows. We pushed heavy furniture against the doors and created makeshift alarm systems with pots and pans strung along fishing line in front of potential entry points. By mid-afternoon, we'd transformed the cabin into something resembling a survival bunker. We inventoried our remaining supplies, food for maybe 3 days if we rationed carefully, plenty of water from the well pump in the kitchen, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army, or one persistent monster. As daylight began to wane, we gathered in the living room, weapons close at hand. The atmosphere was tense with unspoken fear. What do you think it wants? Sage finally asked, breaking the silence. To hunt, Holden replied immediately. You saw those marks in the clearing. It's a predator. But why target us specifically, I wondered. It followed us back to the cabin, damaged the car, cut the phone line. That's not normal predator behavior. None of this is normal, Sage whispered. She'd been quieter than usual since our morning discovery, her face drawn and pale. Now she pulled her knees up to her chest, hugging them tightly. I keep thinking about those symbols on the tree on the car. This isn't just an animal. What else could it be? I asked. She hesitated. In some traditions, there are spirits or entities that guard certain places, ancient things that were here long before humans. What if we crossed into its territory? You mean that do not enter area on the map? Holden asked. Sage nodded. What if your uncle knew about this thing? What if that's why he marked the area? The thought had occurred to me too. Uncle Jerry wasn't the superstitious type, but he knew these woods better than anyone. If he'd marked an area off limits, he must have had a reason. "So what do we do?" Holden asked. "Apologize to the forest demon and hope it lets us go?" "We survive until help comes," I said firmly. "We stick together, keep watch in shifts, and be ready to fight if necessary." As if on cue, a low, rumbling growl came from outside, so close it sounded like it was right against the wall. We all froze, eyes wide, weapons instinctively raised. The growl faded, replaced by a soft scraping sound, claws dragging slowly across the exterior wall, circling the cabin. It was testing our defenses again, looking for a way in. "It's toying with us," Holden whispered. The scraping stopped at the front door. For a moment there was complete silence. Then came 3 distinct knocks, deliberate, almost human-like. My blood ran cold. "Did it just knock?" Sage's voice was barely audible. Before anyone could respond, something heavy slammed against the door, making it shudder in its frame. The barricade held, but just barely. Another slam followed, and another, each impact threatening to break through. I raised the shotgun, aiming at the door. "If it gets in, aim for center mass," I instructed, trying to keep my voice steady. The assault on the door suddenly ceased. Again that eerie silence fell, broken only by our ragged breathing. Then came a new sound, a strange rhythmic clicking, almost like someone rapidly tapping their fingernails on glass. "The window," Holden hissed, pointing to where the clicking originated. Through a gap in our hasty boarding, I caught a glimpse of something pressed against the glass, long skeletal fingers with curved claws that tapped in that unsettling rhythm. But what made my stomach heave was the face behind those fingers, or rather the absence of one. Just as I'd seen earlier, there were no features, just a smooth, pale surface where a face should be. Sage made a small, strangled sound of terror. The creature at the window turned its blank face toward the noise, and though it had no visible eyes, I felt with absolute certainty that it could see us. The tapping stopped. The featureless head tilted slightly, as if considering its next move. Then it was gone, vanishing from the window so quickly it seemed to simply disappear. "Where did it go?" Holden whispered, turning in a slow circle, shotgun raised. We listened intently, but the forest outside had gone completely silent. No wind in the trees, no animal sounds, nothing. It was as if the world beyond our cabin had ceased to exist. "I don't like this," I said. "It's planning something." No sooner had the words left my mouth than a new sound broke the silence. A rhythmic thumping on the roof above us, footsteps moving back and forth across the shingles. Dust and small debris rained down from the ceiling with each heavy step. "The chimney," Sage gasped suddenly. "The fireplace." We whirled toward the stone fireplace, realizing too late the fatal flaw in our fortifications. A shower of soot and debris cascaded down the chimney, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large descending. "Block it!" I shouted, but it was too late. Long, pale limbs emerged from the fireplace, unfolding like a spider coming out of a hole. The creature pulled itself into our sanctuary, rising to its full height, taller than I'd estimated, its head nearly touching the ceiling. In the full light of the cabin, I could finally see it clearly, and the sight stole the breath from my lungs. Its body was emaciated, ribs and vertebrae visible beneath taut, grayish skin that was patched with dark, coarse hair. The limbs were too long, too jointed, bending in ways that human anatomy couldn't allow. And that blank face, now I could see that it wasn't completely featureless after all. Where eyes should have been, there were just shallow depressions in the skin. Below them, a horizontal line marked what might have been a mouth, sealed shut like a scar. "Oh my God," Holden whispered, raising his shotgun with shaking hands. The creature's head swiveled toward the sound. The line of its mouth began to split open, widening far beyond what should have been possible, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. All 3 of us fired at once. The cabin exploded with sound as our weapons discharged simultaneously. The creature jerked backward, dark fluid spraying from its torso. For one brief, hopeful moment, I thought we'd stopped it. Then it straightened, the wounds in its chest already sealing themselves closed. "Run!" I shouted, frantically reloading the shotgun. Sage bolted for the kitchen while Holden fired again, the blast catching the creature in what should have been its face. The featureless head snapped back, a chunk of tissue torn away to reveal not skull or brain, but a writhing mass of what looked like black tendrils. The thing let out a high-pitched, keening wail that made my ears throb. It staggered, momentarily disoriented, giving us precious seconds to retreat. I fired once more, aiming for its knees, then followed Holden and Sage into the kitchen. We slammed the door shut behind us, Holden jamming a chair under the handle while Sage frantically searched the cabinets. "The back door," I gasped, pointing to our only escape route. "We can't go out there," Holden protested. "That thing will hunt us down in the dark." "Better than being cornered in here," I argued, moving toward the door. "If we can make it to the shed I saw behind the cabin, there might be more weapons, or a radio, or—" A massive impact against the kitchen door cut me off. The wood splintered, clawed fingers punching through. "Griffin," Sage called suddenly, holding up a dusty glass bottle. "I found something." The label was faded, but I could make out the words "holy water" written in my uncle's cramped handwriting. "Uncle Jerry wasn't religious," I said, confused. "Doesn't matter," Sage replied, unscrewing the cap. "If your uncle left this here, he had a reason." Another impact rocked the door, the chair beginning to give way. "Whatever we're doing, we need to do it now," Holden shouted, bracing himself against the splintering door. As the creature broke through, Sage hurled the bottle directly at it. The glass shattered against its chest, liquid splashing across its pale skin. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Where the water touched, the creature's flesh began to smoke and bubble, peeling away like paper in flames. It shrieked, an inhuman sound that made blood trickle from my right ear. Thrashing wildly, it retreated from the doorway, giving us our opening. "Go, now!" I shouted, pushing Sage toward the back door. We burst into the night, the cold air shocking after the stuffiness of the cabin. The forest loomed before us, dark and impenetrable. Behind us, the creature's agonized wails continued, but they wouldn't keep it occupied for long. "The shed," I gasped, pointing to a small structure about 30 yards from the cabin. "Run!" We sprinted across the clearing, my lungs burning with each breath. The shed door was secured with a rusted padlock, but Holden made quick work of it with the butt of his shotgun. We tumbled inside, pulling the door shut behind us. The interior was pitch black until Sage activated the flashlight on her phone. The weak beam revealed a cluttered space filled with old tools, dusty equipment, and boxes of forgotten supplies. "What was that stuff?" Holden demanded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "The water?" "I don't know," I admitted, scanning the shed for anything useful, but Uncle Jerry clearly knew more about that thing than he ever told me. Sage moved deeper into the shed, her light revealing more of the space. "Look at this," she said softly. The back wall of the shed was covered with papers, photographs, and maps, all connected with red string in a complex web of information. In the center was a faded photograph of the clearing we'd found, with the scarred tree prominently featured. "Holy shit," Holden breathed. "Your uncle was tracking this thing." I stepped closer, examining the materials. There were newspaper clippings about missing hikers dating back to the 1950s, photocopied pages from obscure books on folklore and mythology, and handwritten notes in Uncle Jerry's distinctive scrawl. One page caught my eye, a sketch of the creature we'd encountered, rendered with disturbing accuracy, including annotations pointing out its features. Below the drawing, Uncle Jerry had written a single word: "Skin stealer." "Skin stealer?" Sage read over my shoulder, her voice trembling. "There's more," I said, pointing to a journal wedged between two boxes. The leather-bound book was worn with age and use. I opened it carefully, revealing more of Uncle Jerry's handwriting. "It's been 10 years since I first encountered the entity in these woods," I read aloud. "Each year it grows bolder, venturing closer to human settlements. It is not of our world, at least not fully. It exists in the spaces between, drawn to our reality by blood and fear." Holden peered over my shoulder as I continued reading. "The natives knew of it. They called it by a name I cannot pronounce, but which roughly translates to the one who wears others. It hunts not just for sustenance, but for new forms to inhabit. It steals the skin of its victims, wearing them like garments until they rot away, forcing it to hunt again." Sage made a small, choked sound of disgust. That's what it wants from us? Our skin? I flipped forward through the journal, scanning for more information. Listen to this. I've discovered 3 things that weaken the entity. First, blessed water, not just any holy water, but water blessed specifically to bind creatures of the void. Second, symbols of warding drawn in human blood. And third, fire. It fears fire above all else. Great, Holden said sarcastically. So we need magic water, blood graffiti, or a flamethrower. Got any of those handy? I ignored him, continuing to search the journal. There's more here about how Uncle Jerry has been containing it for years. He performs some kind of ritual every spring that weakens it and binds it to the clearing with that marked tree. The do not enter area, Sage realized. Exactly, but according to this last entry... I paused, swallowing hard. He wrote this just before moving to Florida. He says the binding was weakening, that he was getting too old to perform the ritual properly. He was worried it wouldn't hold much longer. And then we came along and walked right into its territory, Holden concluded grimly. Waking it up, Sage added, or maybe just giving it access to new victims after who knows how long. A sudden silence fell over us as the implications sank in. This wasn't just some random wilderness predator or cryptid. This was something ancient and malevolent, something that had been contained and was now free, because of us. How do we kill it? Holden asked, breaking the silence. I scanned the journal again. Uncle Jerry doesn't think it can be killed, at least not permanently, but he has instructions here for a stronger binding ritual, something that could banish it back to wherever it came from. What do we need? Sage asked, her earlier fear transforming into determination. Blood, I read. Our blood, willingly given. And these symbols. I pointed to drawings in the journal that matched the marks we'd seen on the tree in the clearing, drawn at the 4 cardinal points around the original binding tree, plus an incantation. This is insane, Holden muttered, but he didn't sound disbelieving anymore, not after what we'd seen. The shed suddenly grew colder, our breath fogging in the air. Outside, something moved, the soft sound of footsteps circling our hiding place. It's found us, I whispered. The walls of the shed began to vibrate with a low, resonant hum. Dust rained down from the ceiling. On the wall, Uncle Jerry's carefully arranged papers began to flutter, then tear themselves free, swirling around the small space as if caught in a windstorm. What's happening? Sage shouted over the growing noise. The answer came in the form of a voice, not spoken aloud but somehow inside our heads. It was ancient and multifaceted, as if thousands of voices were speaking in unison. I have waited so long the pain was immediate and excruciating, like ice picks driving into my temples. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. Beside me, Holden and Sage did the same, their faces contorted in agony. The old man is gone, his bindings weaken. I am hungry. What do you want? I managed to choke out. To wear you, to be you, to walk in your world again. The voice was accompanied by images, flashes of memory that weren't my own. I saw the creature wearing human skins throughout history, walking among people who never suspected the predator in their midst. I saw civilizations rise and fall, and the creature feeding on the fear and chaos. I saw it bound by rituals over and over, always breaking free eventually. You freed me. You will feed me. The humming intensified, and the shed door began to shake in its frame. Metal tools vibrated across the workbench, clattering to the floor. A mason jar filled with nails shattered, sending sharp projectiles flying through the air. One sliced across my cheek, drawing blood. We need to get to that clearing, I shouted to the others over the noise. It's our only chance. How? Holden demanded. That thing is right outside. I looked around frantically, searching for anything we could use. My eyes fell on a rusted can in the corner. The label was peeling, but I could make out the word gasoline. Fire, I said. Uncle Jerry said it fears fire. Understanding dawned on Sage's face. She crawled to a dusty shelf, pulling down boxes until she found what she was looking for, a package of road flares. Will these work? She asked. I nodded, grabbing the gasoline can. It was about a quarter full, not much, but maybe enough. We make a break for the clearing, use the flares to keep it at bay. The shed walls began to crack, long fissures appearing in the wood as if giant hands were squeezing the structure. We didn't have much time. The journal, Sage reminded me. We need the ritual. I snatched up Uncle Jerry's journal, tucking it inside my jacket. Holden readied his shotgun, though we all knew now that conventional weapons would only slow the creature, not stop it. On 3, I said, positioning myself by the door with the gasoline can. 1, 2, 3. I kicked the door open and immediately doused the area outside with gasoline. Sage struck a flare, the brilliant red light temporarily blinding us as she tossed it into the puddle of fuel. Flames erupted with a whoosh, illuminating the night, and the creature standing just beyond the fire, its featureless face reflecting the orange glow. "Go!" I shouted, striking another flare and holding it out like a torch. We ran, using the flares to create a barrier between us and the creature. It followed at a distance, circling, looking for an opening. The flames seemed to genuinely distress it. It wouldn't approach directly, instead darting between trees, always staying just at the edge of the light. The journey to the clearing felt endless, though it couldn't have been more than half a mile. Every shadow seemed to move with malicious intent. Every sound from the forest registered as a potential attack. The flares wouldn't last forever, and we had only brought 3 each. Finally, the trees thinned, and we emerged into the clearing with the scarred tree. In the moonlight, it looked even more ominous, its twisted form resembling a tortured human figure, arms raised in supplication or warning. I pulled out the journal with trembling hands. "We need to draw the symbols at the north, south, east, and west points around the tree," I explained, showing them the diagrams. "Using our own blood." Holden looked sick but determined. "How do we know which way is north?" Sage pulled out her phone. "Compass app," she said, activating it. "At least it's good for something out here." We worked quickly, using Holden's hunting knife to make small cuts on our palms. The blood flowed more freely than I expected, making it easier to draw the complex symbols on the ground. Each was about a foot in diameter, consisting of interlocking curves and angular lines that hurt the eyes to look at directly. As we worked, the forest around us grew increasingly agitated. Wind whipped through the trees, though the air in the clearing remained unnaturally still. Strange lights flickered between distant trunks, not flashlights or flares, but cold blue illumination that moved with purpose. "You cannot bind me again." The voice thundered in our minds, stronger here in the clearing that had been its prison for so long. The pain was almost unbearable, driving Sage to her knees as she finished the Western symbol. "Almost done," I encouraged her, helping her to her feet. "Just the incantation left." I turned to the final page in Uncle Jerry's journal, where he had written out the binding words. The language was unfamiliar, not Latin or any other tongue I recognized. The phonetic guide beneath each line was the only way we'd be able to pronounce it. "We need to stand at 3 points around the tree," I instructed, forming a triangle. "We say the words together." We took our positions, the journal open in my hands. The clearing had gone completely silent now, not even the wind disturbing the perfect stillness. It felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then the creature appeared at the edge of the clearing. It moved differently now, more cautious, perhaps sensing what we intended. Its featureless face turned toward each of us in turn, as if memorizing our positions. The old man failed. "You will fail." "Now!" I shouted, and we began to recite the strange syllables from the journal. The words felt wrong in my mouth, as if they were never meant to be spoken by human tongues. They tasted like metal and ash, and my tongue went numb as I forced out each sound. Beside me, Holden stumbled over the pronunciation but kept going. Sage's voice was the strongest, rolling through the alien phrases with surprising fluency. As we spoke, the symbols we had drawn began to glow, not with light but with a deeper darkness, as if they were holes cut into the fabric of reality itself. The creature let out a terrible wail and rushed forward, its elongated limbs carrying it across the clearing with frightening speed. "Keep going," I shouted between phrases, even as the creature bore down on us. Just as it reached the edge of our triangular formation, something changed. The air between us and the tree seemed to thicken, becoming visible as a swirling vortex of shadow and light. The creature slammed into this barrier and recoiled as if burned. "No, not again." The voice in our heads had lost its commanding power, now tinged with what sounded like fear. The creature clawed at the barrier, leaving trails of darkness in the air itself. Around us, the 4 blood symbols pulsed in rhythm with our words, growing stronger with each repetition of the incantation. We were on the final stanza when the creature changed tactics. Instead of attacking the barrier directly, it began to circle, moving faster and faster until it was just a blur of pale limbs and shadow. The vortex between us wavered, the barrier thinning. "It's not working," Holden cried, his voice cracking with strain. "Don't stop," Sage urged. "We need to complete the ritual." The creature's circling had created a counter-vortex, a whirlwind of negative energy that fought against our binding. I could feel the ritual weakening, the words losing their power as the creature's resistance grew. Then I remembered something else from Uncle Jerry's journal, something I had glimpsed but not fully registered in our haste. A note in the margin. "The binding requires sacrifice. Blood freely given is power." Understanding crashed over me like a wave. Blood drawn for the symbols was not enough. The ritual needed more. It needed true sacrifice. Without breaking the rhythm of the incantation, I stepped forward, moving closer to the binding tree at the center of our formation. The creature sensed my movement and focused its attention on me, its circling pattern shifting to intercept. "Griffin, what are you doing?" Sage called, but I didn't answer, continuing the chant as I approached the tree. When I reached it, I pressed my bleeding palm against the scarred trunk, feeling the rough bark against the open wound. The effect was immediate. The tree seemed to pulse beneath my hand, and the symbols on the ground flared with renewed power. The creature screamed in rage and fear, redoubling its efforts to break through. I knew it wasn't enough. My small cut wouldn't provide the sacrifice needed to complete the binding. With my free hand, I raised Holden's hunting knife. "Griffin, no!" Holden shouted, realizing what I intended. But it was too late. Still chanting, I dragged the blade across my forearm, opening a deep gash that immediately began to pour blood down the trunk of the tree. Pain lanced through me, but I didn't stop the incantation, forcing the alien words through gritted teeth as my blood soaked into the ancient wood. The clearing erupted with light, not from above, but from below, as if the earth itself had become luminous. The 4 symbols we had drawn expanded, lines of power connecting them to form a perfect square around the tree. The creature was caught within this boundary, its frantic movements becoming erratic, desperate. "This is not the end." Its voice was fading now, growing distant as the binding took hold. The swirling vortex between us and the tree expanded, becoming a pillar of darkness that reached from the ground to the sky. The creature was dragged toward it, its limbs flailing as it fought against the pull. With one final desperate lunge, it reached for me, elongated fingers inches from my face. I stared into the blank surface where eyes should have been and felt a moment of connection, a glimpse into an ancient alien consciousness that had existed long before humans walked the earth and would continue long after we were gone. Then it was pulled into the vortex, its form stretching and distorting until it disappeared entirely. The pillar of darkness collapsed in on itself, shrinking to a pinpoint before vanishing with a sound like thunder. The clearing was suddenly completely normal again, just a patch of forest with a twisted tree at its center. The only evidence of what had transpired were our blood symbols on the ground and the deep gash still bleeding on my arm. I slumped against the tree, suddenly exhausted. Sage and Holden rushed to my side, Sage already tearing strips from her shirt to bandage my wound. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," Holden said, his voice shaky with adrenaline and relief. "Did it work?" I asked weakly. "Is it gone?" Sage looked around the clearing, her expression solemn. "Not gone," she said quietly. "Bound, like your uncle did before. But bound more strongly this time, I think." I nodded, too tired to respond further. The blood loss was making me lightheaded, and the events of the night seemed increasingly distant and dreamlike. "Let's get back to the cabin," Holden suggested. "See if we can patch you up properly and figure out what to do next." As they helped me to my feet, I cast one last glance at the tree. In the moonlight, I could have sworn I saw a face in the pattern of the bark, not the creature's blank visage, but Uncle Jerry's weathered features, nodding in approval. But when I blinked, it was gone, just shadows and moonlight playing tricks on an exhausted mind. As we made our way back through the forest, the weight of what had happened and what we had learned settled over us like a heavy blanket. We had encountered something beyond ordinary understanding, something ancient and malevolent that had been hunting in these woods for generations. And while we had bound it for now, I couldn't shake the creature's final words from my mind. "This is not the end. I feared it was right." The walk back to the cabin seemed to take hours, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Every shadow between the trees looked like a reaching limb. Every rustle of leaves sounded like whispered threats. My arm throbbed beneath Sage's makeshift bandage, and fatigue weighed on me like a physical burden. "Almost there," Holden encouraged, supporting my weight as I stumbled over exposed roots. "Just keep moving." When the cabin finally came into view, it looked different somehow, smaller, more vulnerable. The splintered door hung from broken hinges. Claw marks scored the exterior walls. Whatever sanctuary we had imagined it to be had been thoroughly shattered. "We can't stay here," Sage said, voicing what we were all thinking. "Not tonight." "The shed," I suggested weakly. "Uncle Jerry's research." Holden nodded. "It's more secure than the cabin now, and we can barricade the door." We made our way to the shed, which had somehow survived the creature's attack with only minor damage. Inside, we cleared a space among the clutter, creating a makeshift shelter with old tarps and camping equipment we found stored in the corners. Sage tended to my wound properly, cleaning it with supplies from a dusty first aid kit and applying actual bandages. Her hands were steady, but I could see the tremors beginning in her shoulders, delayed shock setting in. "We did it," she said softly, securing the bandage. "We actually bound that thing." "For now," Holden added, paging through Uncle Jerry's journal by the light of our single remaining flare. "According to this, the binding needs to be renewed every spring. That's what your uncle was doing all these years." I leaned back against a stack of boxes, feeling the adrenaline drain from my system and leave nothing but bone-deep exhaustion. "So it's still out there, just waiting?" "Not exactly," Sage replied. "The ritual sends it back to wherever it came from, some kind of in-between place, but the barrier between worlds thins periodically, and that's when the binding needs reinforcement." "How do you know that?" Holden asked, looking up from the journal. Sage hesitated. "I could feel it when we were performing the ritual. It was like information was flowing into me through the words. I can't explain it better than that." We fell silent, each processing in our own way the reality of what we'd encountered, and what we now knew existed in the world. The comfortable certainties of modern life seemed very far away. "What happens now?" Holden finally asked. "We rest," I said. "In the morning we hike out. 15 miles to town isn't impossible." "And then?" Sage pressed. "What do we tell people? Who would believe us?" "No one," I admitted. "We say we had car trouble, got stranded. Keep it simple." Holden laughed humorlessly. "Simple, right, because that's exactly what this situation is." Despite our fear and exhaustion, we managed to sleep in shifts that night. Each of us took a turn standing watch, shotgun in hand, staring out at the darkness beyond the shed door. My watch came just before dawn, and I spent those quiet hours paging through Uncle Jerry's journal, learning the history of the thing we'd faced. According to his research, the creature had been in these woods for centuries, possibly millennia. The local Native American tribes had known of it and performed rituals to keep it contained. When European settlers arrived, they dismissed the warnings as superstition until people began disappearing. A pattern emerged over the generations, periods of dormancy followed by bursts of unexplained disappearances. Uncle Jerry had stumbled upon the truth accidentally in the 1970s when he bought the land and built the cabin. After his own encounter with the creature, he dedicated himself to researching it and continuing the binding ritual each spring. The journal detailed his growing concern as he aged, his fear that no one would take up the responsibility when he could no longer perform the ritual. And then I had come along with my friends, blundering into territory clearly marked, "Do not enter," awakening something ancient and hungry. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the shed windows, I made a decision. I carefully tore several pages from the journal, the ritual instructions, the symbols, and key information about the creature, and folded them into my pocket. The rest I left where Uncle Jerry had kept it. Someone would need to return in the spring. Sage and Holden woke as sunlight strengthened, both looking as haggard as I felt. We gathered what supplies we could carry: water, the remaining flares, Uncle Jerry's compass, and the weapons, and prepared to leave. "We should burn it," Holden said suddenly, looking at the cabin. "Burn it all down." "No," I replied, surprised by the certainty in my voice. "This place is a watchtower. Someone needs to keep an eye on what's bound in those woods." Holden didn't argue, but I could see he disagreed. Sage, however, nodded in understanding. "The land remembers," she said. "This place is part of the binding now." We set off at a steady pace, following the dirt road that led eventually to the highway. The forest seemed different in daylight, less threatening but somehow more secretive, as if hiding knowledge from casual observers. I found myself scanning the trees continuously, expecting to glimpse a tall, pale figure watching our departure. The hike was grueling, especially in my weakened state, but by mid-afternoon we reached the main road. An elderly couple in a pickup truck stopped for us, accepting without question our story about car trouble and offering us a ride to the nearest town. As we drove away, I looked back at the forest receding in the distance. For a moment I thought I saw something at the tree line, a flash of pale movement, but it was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. The next few days passed in a blur of practical concerns, arranging for my car to be towed and repaired, the damage attributed to vandals, organizing our return to Boston, fielding questions from worried family and friends about our abbreviated vacation. We agreed on a simple story: car trouble, no cell service, a long walk to civilization. No one questioned it too deeply. Why would they? The truth was too fantastic, too terrifying to be believed. Uncle Jerry called after I returned home, having received the message I left with the local garage about the car. I braced myself for questions, for anger about the damaged cabin, but they never came. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked instead, his voice heavy with knowledge. "Yes," I answered simply. A long pause. "And we bound it, like you did. But it was close, Uncle Jerry, too close." He sighed, a sound full of relief and lingering fear. "I should have told you. How do you explain something like that? Who would believe it?" "I believe it," I said, "and I understand why you didn't tell me." "What will you do now?" he asked. I touched the folded pages in my pocket, the ritual, the symbols, the knowledge. Someone has to go back in the spring. Someone has to maintain the binding. "Griffin," he began, a warning in his voice. "I know the risks," I cut him off. "But I also know what happens if no one does it." After a long silence, he said, "I'll send you my notes, everything I've learned over the years. It might help." We spoke for another hour, Uncle Jerry filling in gaps that his journal hadn't covered. By the time we hung up, I had a clearer understanding of the responsibility I had inadvertently inherited. Holden and Sage reacted differently to our shared trauma. Holden threw himself into research, spending hours online seeking information about similar entities, similar encounters. He called me late at night to share theories, to discuss Uncle Jerry's journal, to plan for the spring ritual. His fascination bordered on obsession, as if understanding the horror could somehow contain it. Sage retreated to her spiritual practices, but with new intensity. She studied protective rituals from various traditions, learned about warding symbols, and practiced the meditation techniques that had allowed her to connect so effectively with the binding ritual. When we met for coffee 3 weeks after our return, her eyes held a wisdom and wariness that hadn't been there before. "It changed us," she said simply. "We've seen behind the curtain and we can't unsee it." She was right. The world looked different to me now. Shadows seemed deeper, darker, potentially hiding things that shouldn't exist. Crowds made me anxious as I found myself studying faces, looking for the telltale blankness that might reveal an imposter wearing stolen skin. Sleep became a luxury, interrupted by nightmares of elongated limbs and needle teeth. Work seemed pointless, spreadsheets and marketing campaigns meaninglessly trivial in a world where ancient horrors lurked in forgotten corners. I found myself drawing the binding symbols absent-mindedly during meetings, earning concerned looks from colleagues. As winter deepened, my arm healed, leaving a jagged scar that sometimes ached when the weather changed. Holden joked that it was my monster barometer, but we both knew it was something more, a physical connection to what we had encountered, a reminder of the blood sacrifice that had completed the binding. I began preparing for spring, studying Uncle Jerry's additional notes, practicing the words of the ritual until I could recite them in my sleep. I ordered supplies, specific herbs, special candles, a silver knife for the blood offering. Holden and Sage agreed to accompany me, though I tried to dissuade them. "This is my responsibility," I told them during one of our planning sessions in my apartment. "We were all there," Holden countered. "We're all part of this now." Sage nodded in agreement. "The ritual works better with 3 anyway. Balance, harmony, strength." As March arrived, bringing the first hints of thaw, I began having dreams. Vivid, disturbing visions of the clearing with the binding tree. In these dreams, the tree was changing, its bark peeling away to reveal not wood beneath but something pale and pulsing. Sometimes I would see a familiar, featureless face emerging from the trunk, the horizontal line of its mouth slowly stretching open. I woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, the scar on my arm burning as if freshly cut. I didn't tell Holden or Sage about them, not wanting to add to their burden, but I suspected they were having similar experiences. Sage looked more tired with each meeting, while Holden's research became increasingly frantic. Then, 1 week before our planned return to the cabin, I received a package from Uncle Jerry. Inside was a small wooden box carved with the same symbols we had drawn in blood around the binding tree. A note accompanied it. "Griffin, this belonged to the shaman who taught me the binding ritual. He called it a soul anchor. It helps maintain the connection to our world when working with the in-between places. Wear it during the ritual. It offers some protection from what lies beyond the barrier. Be careful. The creature is strongest as the binding weakens. It will know you're coming. It remembers those who bind it. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but I'm proud of you for accepting it. Uncle Jerry." Inside the box was a simple pendant on a leather cord, a small piece of the binding tree, polished smooth and carved with minute symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. I put it on immediately, and that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. As our departure date approached, an unexpected complication arose. A spring storm was predicted to hit the area around the cabin, bringing heavy rain and possible flooding. Delaying wasn't an option. Uncle Jerry's notes were clear that the ritual had to be performed on the spring equinox, when the barrier was thinnest. "We'll just have to deal with the weather," I told Holden and Sage. "The ritual takes precedence." They agreed without hesitation, and on March 19th we loaded my repaired Subaru and headed north once more. The drive was quieter this time, each of us lost in our thoughts, preparing mentally for what lay ahead. No stops at roadside attractions, no light-hearted banter, just 3 people bound by shared knowledge and shared purpose. The storm hit as we turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin. Rain lashed against the windshield, and wind bent the trees along the road into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for our passing car. By the time we reached the cabin, it was nearly dark, the storm having blotted out much of the afternoon light. The cabin looked much as we'd left it, damaged but standing. We moved quickly inside, securing what we could of the broken door and setting up our equipment. This time, we'd come prepared. Industrial flashlights, emergency radios, proper camping gear, and the ritual supplies carefully packed in waterproof bags. That night, as rain hammered the roof and wind howled around the cabin's corners, we made our final preparations. I laid out Uncle Jerry's journal and notes on the kitchen table, reviewing the ritual one last time. Sage prepared the ritual space in the main room, arranging candles and herbs in specific patterns. Holden checked and rechecked our weapons. Not that they would do much good against what we faced, but their presence was comforting. "Tomorrow's the equinox," I said, looking up from the journal. "We should perform the ritual at noon, when the balance between day and night is most perfect." Sage nodded, her fingers tracing patterns in spilled salt on the table. "I've been thinking about the binding. It's not just about containing the creature. It's about maintaining balance. It exists in the spaces between worlds, and the ritual reinforces those boundaries." "Great," Holden muttered, cleaning the shotgun with methodical precision. "Cosmic janitors, that's what we are, sweeping up the mess between dimensions." Despite the tension, I smiled. It was such a Holden thing to say, finding humor in the face of terror. Some things hadn't changed, even after everything we'd experienced. As midnight approached, the storm intensified. Rain turned to hail, pelting the cabin like thrown stones. Lightning flashed with increasing frequency, thunder following so closely it seemed to shake the very foundations of the structure. "Is it just me?" Holden asked during one brief lull. "Or does this storm feel targeted?" Before I could answer, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the cabin, and every light went out simultaneously. We sat in sudden darkness, the only illumination coming from the fitful glow of the fireplace. "I'll check the breaker," I said, reaching for a flashlight. As I moved toward the utility closet where the electrical panel was located, a sound rose above the storm, a low rhythmic thumping against the exterior wall. Not hail or wind-thrown debris, but something deliberate and measured. We all froze, recognition dawning simultaneously. "It's early," Sage whispered, her face pale in the firelight. "The binding shouldn't be weakening until tomorrow." "Unless the storm is accelerating it," I replied, my hand instinctively moving to the pendant around my neck. "Weather affects the barrier. Uncle Jerry mentioned that in his notes." The thumping continued, moving around the perimeter of the cabin with deliberate slowness. Then it stopped at the front door, our weakest point after the creature's previous attack. We braced ourselves for an assault, but it didn't come. Instead, a voice spoke from the darkness beyond the broken door, not in our minds this time, but aloud, using a human vocal apparatus it shouldn't have possessed. "Griffin Mulligan," it said, my name sounding wrong in its mouth. "Open the door, let me in." The voice was eerily familiar. It took me a moment to place it, and when I did, my blood ran cold. It was my own voice. "Don't answer it," Sage warned, gripping my arm. "It's trying to create a connection." "I know you're afraid," the thing with my voice continued. "I can help you understand. I can show you wonders beyond your comprehension." "Go to hell," Holden called back, raising the shotgun. A laugh came from outside, my laugh, but distorted, as if played at the wrong speed. "I've been to places far worse than your concept of hell, Holden Reeves. Would you like to see them? I could show you." The way it used our full names sent a shiver down my spine. It knew us now, in a way it hadn't before. Our binding ritual had created a connection that worked both ways. "The ritual," I whispered to the others. "We need to do it now, not wait for noon." "But the balance," Sage began. "Is already disrupted," I finished for her. "The storm, the early weakening of the barrier, something's changed the equations. We have to adapt." Holden nodded grimly. "What do we need?" I quickly outlined the modified plan. We'd use the cabin as our ritual space instead of the clearing. Uncle Jerry's notes mentioned this was possible in emergencies, though the binding would be weaker. The 4 cardinal points would be the 4 corners of the main room. The binding tree wasn't necessary if we had something else of power to anchor the ritual. "Like this," I said, touching the pendant Uncle Jerry had sent me. "It's a piece of the original tree. It should work." Outside, the creature had fallen silent, but I could feel its presence, a pressure against my mind, searching for weaknesses, for a way in. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating the room in strobing flashes that made the shadows dance like living things. We worked quickly, setting up the ritual space according to my instructions. Sage drew the binding symbols at each corner of the room using chalk infused with crushed herbs. Holden arranged candles in the specific pattern Uncle Jerry had documented. I prepared the central focus, a small bowl into which each of us would contribute blood for the binding. As we worked, the attack on the cabin intensified. No longer content with psychological warfare, the creature began a physical assault. Windows shattered inward, showering us with glass. The damaged door splintered further under powerful blows. Through the gaps, I caught glimpses of elongated limbs and pale skin. "Hurry," I urged, placing the final elements of the ritual. We took our positions at 3 points, forming a triangle around the central bowl. The pendant hung above it, suspended from a makeshift stand. Outside, the creature howled, a sound of rage and hunger that cut through the storm like a blade. "Begin," I said, and we started the incantation. The words came easier this time, our tongues remembering the alien syllables from our previous encounter. As we chanted, the symbols at the corners of the room began to glow with that strange anti-light we had seen before, darkness that was somehow visible, consuming the normal light around it. The assault on the cabin redoubled. Parts of the roof tore away, rain pouring in to drench us as we continued the ritual. Through the growing gaps in the walls, I could see the creature more clearly now. Its emaciated form, its 2 long limbs, and its face. It had changed. No longer a blank, featureless expanse. Its face now showed the beginning stages of transformation. My own features were partially formed on its surface, my eyes, my mouth, but distorted, as if seen through rippling water. It was becoming me. "Don't look at it," Sage warned, sensing my distraction. "Focus on the ritual." I tore my gaze away, continuing the chant. We reached the point where blood was required. Each of us stepped forward in turn, cutting our palms and letting blood drip into the central bowl. As the third drop, mine, fell into the mixture, the pendant began to glow with an inner light. A vortex formed above the bowl, similar to what we had seen in the clearing, but smaller, more controlled. The creature realized what was happening and made one desperate attempt to stop us, flinging itself at the cabin with such force that an entire wall collapsed inward. It stood there among the ruins, half inside the ritual space, its partially formed face, my face, contorted in rage. One elongated arm reached for me, claws extended. "You are mine," it snarled with my voice. "Now," I shouted to the others. "The final words." We spoke the last phrase of the ritual in perfect unison, our voices blending into something greater than the sum of its parts. The vortex expanded suddenly, engulfing the creature where it stood. It screamed, not with my voice now, but with that ancient multi-toned wail we had heard before. Its form distorted, stretching toward the center of the vortex like water down a drain. The face it had been forming dissolved, returning to that blank slate. For one moment it locked what would have been its gaze with mine, and I felt its hatred, ancient, patient, and absolute. Then it was gone, pulled into the vortex which collapsed in on itself with a thunderclap that momentarily drowned out even the storm. We stood in silence, surrounded by the wreckage of the cabin, rain pouring down on us through the ruined roof. The binding symbols had burned themselves into the floorboards, permanent scars in the wood. "Did it work?" Holden asked, his voice hoarse from the ritual. Before I could answer, the pendant that had hung above the bowl shattered, fragments scattering across the floor. Among the pieces lay something new, a small, dark stone that pulsed with the same anti-light as the binding symbols. "Yes," Sage answered for me, staring at the stone. "But differently than before. We didn't send it back this time." "What do you mean?" Holden asked. I understood, reaching down to pick up the stone. It was warm to the touch, vibrating slightly against my palm. "We've bound it to this," I explained. "It's a prison, not a banishment." "Is that better or worse?" Holden wondered. "Different," I repeated Sage's assessment. "More portable, more permanent, maybe. But also more dangerous," Sage added, "if the stone is broken." She didn't need to finish the thought. We all understood the implications. The creature wasn't gone. It was contained, compressed into this small object I now held in my hand. A responsibility even greater than returning each spring for the ritual. As if responding to this realization, the storm began to subside. Rain softened to a gentle patter, wind died down to a whisper, and the first hints of morning light appeared on the horizon. "What now?" Holden asked, surveying the destroyed cabin. "We protect this," I said, closing my fingers around the stone. "We learn everything we can about it, and we make sure it never escapes again." Sage placed her hand over mine, covering the stone. "Not just you, us. We're in this together." Holden joined his hand to ours. "Cosmic janitors, like I said. Someone's got to do the dirty work." As dawn broke fully over the devastated cabin, we made a pact to guard the stone, to study Uncle Jerry's research, to be vigilant against the thing we had bound. We knew it wasn't over. The creature was ancient and patient. It could wait, and so could we. In the months since that night, life has acquired a new rhythm. On the surface, things appear normal. I still work at Westfield Marketing. Holden still chases conspiracy theories. Sage still sells essential oils and leads meditation sessions. But beneath this veneer of normalcy runs a current of vigilance. The stone never leaves me. I wear it in a specially designed case around my neck, opposite Uncle Jerry's pendant, which somehow reformed itself in the weeks following the ritual. Holden and Sage have similar stones now, smaller fragments that broke off from the main prison, each containing just a small piece of the entity. We are connected by them, bound to each other and to our shared burden. We meet regularly to check the strength of the binding, to perform minor rituals that reinforce the prison. We've traveled to obscure libraries and private collections, building on Uncle Jerry's research, learning more about what we face. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel it stirring within the stone, testing, probing, searching for weaknesses. Sometimes I dream of a featureless face slowly growing my features. Sometimes I hear my own voice whispering promises of power and knowledge if I would just break the stone, just let it out, just let it in. I never will. But a part of me knows that this is not the end. It's merely a pause in a story that began centuries before I was born and will continue long after I'm gone. The thing in the woods is waiting, and so am I. I was born in Belém, a bustling city nestled at the mouth of the Amazon River. My early years were spent in the comforting embrace of my grandparents' home on the outskirts of the city, where the urban sprawl of Belém began to give way to the lush greenery of Ananindoa. Those were simpler times, filled with the aroma of my grandmother's cooking and the rhythmic creaking of my grandfather's rocking chair on the porch. Little did I know that my idyllic childhood was about to be shattered by a series of events that would alter the course of my life forever. It began with the passing of my beloved grandfather. I remember the day vividly, the hushed voices, the black clothes, the suffocating smell of lilies. I was too young to fully comprehend the finality of death, but I understood that a vital presence had been torn from my world. The void left by my grandfather's passing seemed to create a rift in our family's foundation. Within months, my parents' marriage, which I had always perceived as unshakable, began to crumble. Their arguments, once rare and quickly resolved, became frequent and venomous. I would often find myself huddled in my room, hands clasped over my ears, trying to drown out their raised voices. The divorce, when it finally came, was like a thunderclap in a clear sky. Suddenly, my world was divided into two separate spheres, my mother's apartment in the city center, and my father's new life in a different neighborhood. I felt like a planet knocked out of orbit, oscillating between two suns, never quite finding my place. As if fate hadn't dealt us enough blows, my grandmother's mind began to slip away. It started with small things, forgetting where she had placed her glasses, mixing up the names of her grandchildren. But soon it became clear that this wasn't mere absent-mindedness. The vibrant, loving woman who had been the cornerstone of our family was being consumed by the insidious progression of Alzheimer's disease. Watching her decline was perhaps the most painful experience of all. There were moments of lucidity when she would look at me with recognition, her eyes lighting up with the warmth I remembered. But these moments became increasingly rare, replaced by vacant stares and confused mumbling. The woman who had taught me to read, who had patiently guided my clumsy fingers as I learned to tie my shoelaces, was fading away before my eyes. It was in the wake of these upheavals that my father made the decision to move into a house in the heart of Belém. This house, I would later learn, had been built by my grandmother in the 1970s, during happier times. Little did we know that this seemingly ordinary dwelling would become the stage for a series of extraordinary and terrifying events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. The house on Rua das Mangueiras stood out from its neighbors, not because of any architectural grandeur, but because of the sense of history that seemed to cling to its walls. As we approached it for the first time, I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. The large front yard was overgrown, nature reclaiming what had once been a well-manicured lawn. 2 doors faced the street, one leading to the kitchen, the other to the living room. They seemed to stare at us like eyes, wary of our intrusion. My father unlocked the kitchen door and we stepped into a time capsule. The air was thick with the musty smell of disuse, mingled with the lingering aroma of decades-old cooking. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. As my eyes adjusted to the dim interior, I began to make out the details of the space. The outdated appliances, The faded linoleum floor, the worn countertops bearing the scars of countless meal preparations. From the kitchen, a long corridor stretched out before us, disappearing into the shadows of the house's interior. My father flicked a light switch, and a series of bare bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the passage. The corridor formed a T-shape, with bedrooms and a service room branching off to the left, while the right led to another kitchen in the backyard. As we explored the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The rooms seemed to hold their breath as we entered, only to exhale when we left. In the last bedroom, at the end of the left branch of the corridor, I paused. Something about this room felt different. The air was cooler here, and I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper just at the edge of my hearing. When I mentioned this to my father, he laughed it off, attributing it to the old house settling. That night, as I lay in my new bedroom trying to sleep amidst the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the house, I heard my father moving restlessly in his room across the hall. Little did I know that this was the beginning of his nocturnal torments, experiences he would keep to himself for years to come. In the days that followed, we settled into a routine. My father threw himself into the task of renovating the house, determined to breathe new life into the old structure. I helped where I could, painting walls and clearing out years of accumulated junk from the attic and basement. But even as we worked to make the house our own, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was resistant to our efforts, as if it had a will of its own. It was during this time that I first noticed the shadows. At first I dismissed them as tricks of the light, the natural play of sunlight and shadow in an old house. But as the days wore on, I began to notice patterns. The shadows seemed to move independently of any light source, darting from room to room when viewed from the corner of my eye. When I tried to focus on them directly, they would vanish, leaving me questioning my own perceptions. My father never mentioned seeing anything unusual, but I began to notice changes in his behavior. He became more withdrawn, spending long hours in his study, poring over old books and papers. At night, I would often hear him pacing in his room, muttering to himself in low, urgent tones. When I asked him about it, he would brush off my concerns, insisting that he was just having trouble sleeping in the new environment. It wasn't until years later, after my father's passing, that I would discover the truth about those early days in the house on Rua das Mangueiras. His diary, found tucked away in a drawer of his desk, would reveal the full extent of the terror he had experienced and kept hidden from me. The discovery of my father's diary in 2006 was like opening Pandora's box. The leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with my father's precise handwriting, told a story so terrifying that it shook me to my core. As I read entry after entry, I began to understand the true nature of the house we had lived in and the horrors my father had endured in silence. The first entry was dated just a week after we moved in, July 15th, 1995. It happened again last night. The screaming, the banging on my bedroom door. It sounds like a crowd of people angry and desperate, but when I gather the courage to open the door, the hallway is empty and silent. Am I losing my mind? As I read on, the entries became more detailed, more frantic. My father described seeing shadowy figures moving through the T-shaped corridor, always darting from right to left. He wrote about feeling a presence in his room at night, a weight on his chest that made it difficult to breathe. The maids he hired to help with the housework reported similar experiences, refusing to stay in the house after dark. One entry particularly chilled me. September 3rd, 1995. I saw her today, a woman in a white dress standing at the end of the corridor. She was translucent like a projection on mist. When I called out, she turned to look at me. Her face, God help me, her face was a void, a black emptiness where features should have been. I ran back to my room and locked the door. I can still hear her fingernails scratching at the wood. Reading these accounts, I felt a mix of horror and guilt. How could I have been so oblivious to my father's suffering? Why hadn't he confided in me? The answer, I realized, lay in his final entries. He had been protecting me, shielding me from the terrors that plagued our home. June 10th, 2006. I can't keep this up much longer. The entities in this house are growing stronger, more bold. But I can't leave. I won't leave my child to face this alone. I'll find a way to end this, to cleanse this house. If anything happens to me, I pray that this diary finds its way to my child. Knowledge is power, and in this case it may be the only defense against the darkness that dwells here. This was the last entry in the diary. My father passed away a week later, officially from a heart attack. But now, reading his words, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to his death than natural causes. The diary ended, but our story in the house was far from over. As my mother and I moved in following my father's death, the strange occurrences continued, affecting everyone except me. It was as if I was blind to a world that others could see clearly, and this frustrated me to no end. I yearned for proof, for a glimpse into the supernatural realm that seemed to coexist with our mundane reality. This frustration would lead me down a path of spiritual exploration, delving into various forms of occultism and esoteric practices. Little did I know that my search for answers would only lead to more questions, and that the house on Rua das Mangueiras had many more secrets to reveal. In the years following my father's death, my frustration at being unable to experience the supernatural phenomena that seemed to affect everyone else in the house grew into an obsession. I became determined to pierce the veil between worlds, to see and understand what my father had seen. This determination led me on a journey through various spiritual and occult practices, each promising enlightenment and supernatural power. My first foray was into Gnosticism. The idea of hidden knowledge, of a truth concealed from the masses, appealed to my desire for understanding. I spent months poring over ancient texts, meditating on esoteric symbols, and attempting to achieve gnosis, direct experience of the divine. But despite my efforts, the shadows remained resolutely invisible to me, and the house's mysteries remained unsolved. Undeterred, I turned to voodoo. The raw power of this Afro-Caribbean religion, with its drums and possessions, seemed like it might be the key to unlocking my latent abilities. I attended rituals, learned to create gree bags, and even attempted to communicate with the Loe. But while the ceremonies were fascinating, they brought me no closer to experiencing the phenomena that continued to plague my mother and our household staff. My exploration took a darker turn as I delved into Luciferian rituals. The promise of forbidden knowledge was alluring, and I convinced myself that embracing the darkness might allow me to see the shadows that haunted our home. I performed elaborate ceremonies in the dead of night, calling upon entities I barely understood. Looking back, I shudder at the risks I took during this period. Thankfully, nothing manifested, or if it did, I remained frustratingly blind to it. Realizing that perhaps I was looking in the wrong direction, I turned to more mainstream religions. I studied Islam, drawn by its rich mystical traditions and the concept of jinn, supernatural creatures that seemed similar to what we were experiencing. I learned to recite Quranic verses and performed salat, hoping that this monotheistic faith might offer protection and insight. But the shadows continued their dance, visible to all but me. Hinduism, with its vast pantheon of gods and intricate philosophical systems, was my next stop. I practiced yoga and meditation, chanted mantras, and studied the Vedas. The concept of Maya, the illusory nature of reality, resonated with me, but it didn't help me penetrate the illusion that seemed to hide the supernatural from my perception. Buddhism, with its emphasis on mindfulness and the nature of consciousness, seemed promising. I spent hours in meditation, attempting to cultivate the kind of awareness that might allow me to perceive other realms of existence. But while I found a measure of peace in these practices, the ghosts and shadows remained stubbornly out of my reach. Throughout this spiritual odyssey, life in the house continued its strange rhythm. My mother, grandmother, and the maids would casually mention seeing figures moving from room to room, as if commenting on the weather. They described shadows that seemed to have weight and substance, darting through the T-shaped corridor with unsettling speed. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut without any breeze, and the sensation of being watched was a constant companion. I felt like a blind man in a world of sighted people, desperately seeking a cure for my condition. Each new practice, each new ritual or meditation technique filled me with hope that this, finally, would be the key to unlocking my perception. And each time, I was left disappointed and increasingly frustrated. It wasn't until years later, when I had all but given up on my quest, that the supernatural would finally manifest in my experience in an undeniable way. But before that could happen, life had more twists in store for our family, and the house on Rua das Mangueiras had not yet revealed all of its secrets. As my spiritual explorations continued without success, life moved forward relentlessly. In 2012, we received devastating news. My mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. The disease seemed to cast a shadow over our lives, darker and more tangible than any of the spectral entities that haunted our home. Watching my mother battle cancer was a harrowing experience. The strong, vibrant woman who had raised me single-handedly after my father's death was now frail and often bedridden. The treatments were grueling, and there were days when I feared we might lose her. It was during this time that I began to question the purpose of my obsession with the supernatural. In the face of such a real and immediate threat to our family, my quest for ghostly encounters seemed trivial and self-indulgent. Yet even as we grappled with my mother's illness, the strange occurrences in the house continued unabated. If anything, they seemed to intensify, as if feeding off the fear and despair that permeated our home. My mother, in her more lucid moments between treatments, would describe seeing shadowy figures standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. She insisted they weren't threatening, but their presence unsettled her nonetheless. In 2013, in the midst of this turmoil, a ray of hope entered our lives. My daughter was born. Her arrival was like a burst of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in months, laughter echoed through the old house on Rua das Mangueiras. My mother, despite her weakness, found renewed strength in her role as a grandmother. It was as if my daughter's innocent presence drove back the shadows, if only temporarily. But as my daughter grew, so did my concerns. Would she, like me, be blind to the supernatural forces that seemed to inhabit our home? Or would she, like my mother and the others, be able to see the shadowy figures and experience the strange phenomena? The thought of my child being exposed to these entities filled me with a protective fear I had never known before. By 2015, my mother's condition had deteriorated significantly. The cancer had spread, and the doctors were running out of options. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that my mother made a decision that would change everything. She invited a Mãe de Santo, a priestess from the Afro-Brazilian religion of Candomblé, to perform a cleansing ritual in our backyard. I was skeptical at first. After years of exploring various spiritual practices without results, I had become somewhat cynical about such rituals. But I could see the hope in my mother's eyes, and I didn't have the heart to refuse her this chance, no matter how slim. The Mãe de Santo arrived on a sweltering afternoon in July. She was a striking woman, tall and regal, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. As she set up for the ritual in our backyard, the very spot where most of the shadowy figures had been seen, I felt a palpable tension in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The ritual began with the Mãe de Santo chanting in Yoruba, her voice rising and falling in hypnotic cadence. She sprinkled sacred herbs and poured libations, calling upon the Orixas, the deities of Candomblé, for protection and healing. The light bulbs in the back portion of the house began to explode. One by one they burst with sharp cracks, showering glass and sparks. It wasn't a gentle burning out. Each bulb exploded with a force that sent shards flying across the rooms. The sound was like rapid gunfire, echoing through the house. I stood there, frozen in disbelief. This was it, the undeniable proof of the supernatural that I had been seeking for years. And yet in that moment I felt no triumph, only a bone-deep terror that left me trembling. The Mãe de Santo, however, seemed unfazed. If anything, her chants grew louder, more insistent, as if she was locked in a battle of wills with an unseen force. The air crackled with an energy I had never felt before, electric and alive. As suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last bulb exploded, plunging the back of the house into darkness. In the eerie silence that followed, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. The Mãe de Santo's voice, now soft and soothing, brought me back to reality. "It is done," she said simply, her eyes meeting mine with a knowing look. "The spirits have been appeased." In the days that followed, my mother reported feeling better than she had in months. Whether it was the power of the ritual or simply the hope it had given her, I couldn't say. but I couldn't deny the change in her. She seemed more energetic, more alive. As for me, the experience had left me shaken to my core. After years of seeking proof of the supernatural, I had finally received it in the most dramatic way possible. But instead of satisfaction, I felt a deep, unsettling fear. What exactly were we dealing with in this house, and what had we unleashed with this ritual? Little did I know this was just the beginning. The events that followed would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality, faith, and the thin veil that separates our world from the unseen realms beyond. In the months following the candomblé ritual, I found myself in a state of constant unease. The exploding light bulbs had shattered more than just glass. They had broken through the walls of skepticism I had built around myself. I could no longer deny the reality of the supernatural forces at work in our home. This realization led me to many sleepless nights, tossing and turning as I replayed the events in my mind. It was during one of these restless nights that I had a dream so vivid and profound that it would alter the course of my life once again. In the dream, I found myself standing in the T-shaped corridor of our house. The air was thick with a luminous mist that seemed to pulse with life. At the end of the corridor stood a figure bathed in golden light. As I approached, I realized it was the Virgin Mary, her eyes filled with infinite compassion. She spoke to me, her voice resonating not in my ears, but in my very soul. "My child," she said, "you have been seeking with your eyes open. Now learn to see with your heart." I woke up with tears streaming down my face, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The dream felt more real than any of my waking experiences with the supernatural. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing me to see clearly for the first time. Driven by this experience, I found myself drawn back to the Catholic faith of my childhood. The very next Sunday, I attended Mass for the first time in years. As I sat in the pew listening to the familiar rhythms of the liturgy, I felt a profound sense of homecoming. However, my return to Catholicism seemed to trigger a new wave of supernatural activity in the house. It was as if the entities that had been lurking in the shadows were now boldly making their presence known. The first incident occurred just days after my first Mass. I was walking down the T-shaped corridor when I saw it, a gray, amorphous mass darting from the backyard towards the last bedroom. It moved with startling speed, but what struck me most was the sense of intelligence behind its movement. This wasn't some mindless specter. It felt like a conscious entity, observing and reacting to my presence. Weeks later, on a quiet afternoon, I had an encounter that chilled me to the bone. I was passing by one of the bedrooms when I caught a glimpse of movement. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, ran from one room to another. She had bright blonde hair, fair skin, and wore a white lace dress that seemed to belong to another era. My heart racing, I followed her into the bedroom, calling out softly. But when I entered the room, it was empty. There was no sign of the child, no place she could have hidden. The window was closed and latched from the inside. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. These experiences, as terrifying as they were, also filled me with a strange sense of validation. After years of being the only one unable to see the supernatural activity in the house, I was now experiencing it firsthand. But with this validation came a growing fear. What were these entities? What did they want? And more importantly, were they a threat to my family? My spiritual journey wasn't over yet. As I delved deeper into my renewed faith, I felt drawn to the rich traditions and mysticism of Eastern Orthodoxy. The icons, the incense, the sense of ancient wisdom, all of it spoke to something deep within me. After months of study and contemplation, I made the decision to convert to Orthodox Christianity. Little did I know that this decision would mark the beginning of the most intense and terrifying period of supernatural activity our house had ever seen. The entities that haunted our home seemed to react to my newfound faith with a fury that would test the limits of my sanity and my belief. As I embraced my new spiritual path, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched more closely than ever before. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, the whispers in the night more insistent. It was as if my declaration of faith had drawn a line in the sand, and the entities on the other side were preparing for battle. I was about to learn that in the realm of the supernatural, faith can be both a powerful shield and a provocative challenge. The events that followed would push me to the very edge of my beliefs and force me to confront the darkness that had taken root in our home. My conversion to Eastern Orthodoxy seemed to act as a catalyst, intensifying the supernatural activity in our house to unprecedented levels. It was as if my embrace of this ancient faith had stirred up a hornet's nest of spiritual entities, each more determined than the last to make their presence known. The first major incident occurred on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. My daughter, now a toddler, was playing in the very bedroom where I had seen the phantom girl in the white lace dress. I was in the kitchen preparing a snack for her when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The slam of a heavy door followed by my daughter's terrified screams. I ran towards her room, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the door, I found it shut tight. I turned the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked from the inside. "Sweetie, can you open the door?" I called out, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. But my daughter's only response was continued screaming and crying. A primal fear took over me. I threw my body against the door once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, I felt something give way. The door burst open, nearly coming off its hinges. My daughter was huddled in the corner of the room, her eyes wide with terror. I scooped her up in my arms, murmuring soothing words as I checked her for any injuries. Physically, she was unharmed, but the fear in her eyes told me that the damage went deeper than a physical wound. As I calmed her down, I surveyed the room. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet the atmosphere felt charged, as if the air itself was crackling with an unseen energy. The door, which I knew for a fact didn't have a lock, now sported a heavy antique latch that I had never seen before. As I watched, the latch seemed to shimmer and then fade away, leaving the door as it had always been. This incident shook me to my core. It was one thing for these entities to target me, but threatening my child crossed a line. I knew I had to take action to protect my family. Drawing on my newfound Orthodox faith, I decided to create a spiritual barrier in our home. I hung religious icons in the T-shaped corridor, focusing on powerful protectors like Saint Michael the Archangel and Saint George the Dragon Slayer. I blessed each room with holy water and recited prayers of protection. To my relief, these measures seemed to have an effect. The oppressive atmosphere in the house lifted somewhat, and the more dramatic manifestations ceased. But the entities were far from gone. Instead, they seemed to retreat into the shadows, their presence becoming more subtle but no less unsettling. For years, we lived in a state of uneasy coexistence with the unseen inhabitants of our home. We would hear knocks on bedroom doors when no one was there, loud bangs that echoed through the house in the dead of night, and footsteps in empty rooms. The shadows continued their dance at the edges of our vision, always just out of clear sight. Some of the occurrences were almost comical in their absurdity. On multiple occasions, we would hear the toilet seat in the bathroom lifting and lowering on its own, as if some unseen entity was using the facilities. It was tempting to laugh off these incidents to try to find rational explanations, but we knew better. The house had shown us too much of its true nature for us to doubt anymore. Even my daughter, as she grew older, began to have her own encounters. One night, when she was about 5 years old, she woke up needing to use the bathroom. As she sat on the toilet, still groggy with sleep, she saw something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. A tall, lanky gray figure stood in the doorway watching her. Its face was featureless, except for a wide, sharp-toothed grin that seemed to split its head in half. As my daughter stared in horror, unable to move or cry out, the figure raised a long-fingered hand as if in greeting. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. When she told me about this encounter the next morning, I was torn between wanting to dismiss it as a nightmare and the chilling certainty that what she had seen was all too real. The description matched too closely with other sightings in the house to be mere coincidence. As the years passed, we learned to live with the constant undercurrent of supernatural activity. It became a part of our daily lives, as routine as the creaking of old floorboards or the whistle of wind through loose window panes. But we never let our guard down completely. We knew that at any moment, the tenuous peace could be shattered, and the entities could once again assert their presence in more dramatic and terrifying ways. Little did we know that the most chilling encounter was yet to come, an event that would force us to confront the true nature of the forces we were dealing with and question everything we thought we knew about the barriers between our world and the realms beyond. It was a balmy evening in Belém, the kind where the air hangs heavy with humidity and the scent of blooming jasmine. My daughter was at a sleepover, leaving the house unusually quiet. My wife and I were in our bedroom enjoying a rare moment of peace as we chatted about the events of the day. Our conversation drifted to a young woman we knew, recently married and expecting her first child. We spoke of her excitement, her hopes and fears about impending motherhood. It was a normal, mundane conversation, the kind that happens in countless homes every night. But what happened next was far from normal. As we talked, a voice suddenly cut through our conversation. Clear and distinct, it said, "Eu quero a minha mãe." I want my mama, in English. The voice seemed to come from within our very walls, as if the house itself was speaking. We froze, our own conversation dying mid-sentence. The voice was unsettling, not just in its sudden appearance, but in its quality. It sounded like an adult trying to mimic a child's voice, a grotesque parody of innocence that sent chills down my spine. For a moment we sat in stunned silence, looking at each other with wide eyes. Then, almost against my will, I felt a surge of anger rise within me. After years of enduring these supernatural intrusions, this felt like a violation of our most intimate spaces. "Shut up!" I shouted at the unseen entity. "I hate you. You'll lose anyway." As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a shift in the atmosphere of the room. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the corners deepened. It was as if my outburst had provoked a response from whatever forces inhabited our home. Determined to find a rational explanation, I went outside to check with our neighbors. But they were all gathered in their front yard, a good 30 meters away from where we had heard the voice. There was no way their conversation could have carried so clearly into our bedroom. As I returned to the house, a chilling realization settled over me. This was no trick of acoustics, no overheard snippet of conversation. The voice we had heard was something else entirely, something that defied rational explanation. This incident marked a turning point in our relationship with the supernatural forces in our home. It was as if a line had been crossed, a boundary violated. The entities were no longer content with shadows and movement. They had found a voice, and they were using it to communicate directly with us. In the days and weeks that followed, we were on high alert, constantly listening for any further vocal manifestations. But the house remained stubbornly silent, as if the entities were waiting, biding their time for their next move. This experience forced me to confront my beliefs about the nature of these supernatural occurrences. As an Orthodox Christian, I didn't believe in ghosts in the conventional sense. Our faith teaches that after death, souls go either to heaven or to hell, not lingering in earthly realms. But if not ghosts, then what were we dealing with? The more I pondered this question, the more I began to suspect that we were facing something far more sinister and complex than mere spectral remnants of the deceased. I began to see our supernatural roommates not as lost souls but as demons, entities that thrive on deception and fear. This realization was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Terrifying because it meant we were up against forces of genuine evil. Comforting because my faith gave me tools to combat such entities. I doubled down on my spiritual practices, praying more fervently than ever before. I sought guidance from my priest, who listened to my story with a grave expression before offering prayers of protection and advice on strengthening our spiritual defenses. But even as I fortified our home spiritually, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were engaged in a battle that was far from over. The voice in the walls had opened a new chapter in our haunted saga, one that would challenge our sanity, our faith, and our very understanding of reality. As I write this memoir, sitting in the very house where all these events transpired, I can't help but wonder what the future holds. Will we ever be free of these supernatural presences, or are we destined to continue this uneasy coexistence, always waiting for the next manifestation, the next intrusion from the world beyond? One thing is certain, our experiences in this house have forever changed us. We've glimpsed a reality beyond the veil of the everyday world, a reality that most people never encounter. It's a heavy knowledge to carry, but also a profound one. To those who might read this and doubt, I can only say this: there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Our story is true, every chilling, inexplicable bit of it. And if it serves as a warning, a call to open your eyes to the unseen realities that surround us all, then perhaps all our fear and struggle will have served a purpose. As for me and my family, we continue to live in this house, navigating the thin line between the natural and supernatural worlds. We've learned to coexist with the unknown, to find strength in our faith and in each other, and we remain ever vigilant, knowing that at any moment the veil between worlds might once again grow thin, bringing us face to face with the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of our home on Rua das Mangueiras. Stay safe, dear listener. And remember, not all houses are merely brick and mortar. Some, like ours, are gateways to realms beyond our understanding. May you never find yourself on the wrong side of that gateway.